Well, good morning, councillors and council staff. Welcome to this special meeting to deal with the Sunshine Coast mass transit update. I welcome those people who are joining us via live stream and hope you enjoy this morning's deliberations. I'd like to start by an acknowledgement to our traditional custodians, and I'd ask you to be upstanding whilst that's delivered by Councillor Maria Suarez.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On behalf of Council, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Sunshine Coast local government area, whose lands and waters we all now share. The Cubby Cubby peoples of the coastal plains and northern hinterland, and on whose traditional lands we gather today, and the Jinnaburra peoples of the southern hinterland. We recognise that these lands have always been places of cultural, spiritual, social and economic significance. The traditional custodians' unique values and ancient and enduring cultures deepen and enrich the life of our community. We acknowledge their care for the land for thousands of years, and we recognise the legacy issues resulting from colonisation are still experienced by traditional custodians and First Nations people. We wish to pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role First Nations people continue to play within the Sunshine Coast community. We acknowledge the important role First Nations people continue to play within the Sunshine Coast community, and we are committed to better understanding the collective history of the Sunshine Coast and the experiences of First Nations peoples.
Thank you, Councillor Suarez. Please be seated. Councillors, we have no apologies from councillors. We do have apologies from Greg Laverty, Michael Costello and Deborah Robinson from our senior team. I also want to inform councillors and draw to your attention that on the 21st of May 2018, amendments to the Local Government Act 2009 came into force. These amendments include the new Division 5A, which provides new legislative arrangements for dealing with councillors' personal interests in local government matters, and these arrangements will apply to how we manage those matters at today's meeting. So, given we only have the one item of business, being item 8.1, please, if there is any conflict, perceived conflict, advise me, or material personal interest, advise me prior to that beginning. I also would ask someone to move a suspension of standing orders to allow live streaming in the interests of the safety and health of the community. The Local Government Regulation 2012 has recently been amended in relation to public attendance at council meetings. This is to enable councils to comply with the national public health directions related to COVID-19. Is somebody prepared to move? We're going to thank you, Councillor Natoli, seconded Councillor Johnston. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Rightio, we'll move on to item 8.1, and Ken Deutscher is here to open the presentation. Thank you, Ken.
Sunshine Coast Mass Transit, employed by Council. Today we're going to update you on the workings of the Mass Transit project and provide a framework for community consultation. The project is obviously a key initiative of Council. It's embedded in the growth management agenda of Council, and it's really aiming to, I guess, change travel behaviours and also to support the growth management plan, which aims to achieve a balance between consolidation and expansion of the urban areas. As per the report, outlining the growth management connections, providing an overview of the business case process in Queensland, and advising Council of progress, presenting the community framework for endorsement. I'm going to cover those 3 and 4 in reverse order, if that's okay. So the focus of this phase that we're working on. Council's taken the initiative in preparing the initial phases of the business case. The project will need to be delivered by the Queensland Government, responsible for public transport, but due to its role in shaping the future of the region, Council's taken the initiative to do the initial 2 stages. And there is an agreement notified by the Premier last May 2019, actually, that the state will take the findings of this work into the detailed business case. So options is the name of the game in this phase. When I ring Infrastructure Australia or Building Queensland, they see my number, they answer the phone, options, because that's what they want us to look at. It's not so much to prove that a preferred option has got a strong business case. That's, foreshadowed. Clearly, if you can't get an option that works, you're not going to be taking it forward. But really, the process is aiming at evaluating options. And because, as I said, the linkage to growth management, some of the decisions relate to how well the technology chosen for a mass transit solution might support urban transformation. So what are the abilities of different types of mass transit to sync in with that urban transformation agenda? And the choices for the region at that level are elegantly simple. Extra 200,000 or so people in the next 20 years. That's just a point in time, of course, 2041. It's the limit of our planning models. That's a city the size of Townsville that will be added in 20 or so years. So significant infrastructure and things required for that. And clearly where those new dwellings and businesses go is an important feature of what the region looks like. The expansion model, which tends to be car-based, trading off access to, close access to things like jobs and beaches and coffee shops for space. That's the suburban model, very well tried and true in Australia. And the consolidation model, more about creating lifestyle precincts closer to your attractions, close to where people, want to go, and linking that up with, say, a mass transit, because you've got more people moving in a confined area. So the car, while it's a wonderful feature of Australian society, when you start to get a lot of them in a confined space, they start to cause congestion, and that creates a whole range of issues. Now, the Council's growth management strategy, which it's been working on for some years, actually looks to achieve a balance between those 2 extreme options. So some expansion, so the Aura, Palmview, and in the future Biwa East, and some consolidation in the coastal precinct. So that is our brief as a mass transit team, is to sort of work in with that growth management plan. So what are the problems that are being addressed by the mass transit project? The urban expansion is starting to accelerate because we're getting the new greenfield communities coming online. So Aura, I think, started to come online around 2016, starting to accelerate. Palmview came online a couple of years later, starting to accelerate. And we're sort of finding that those trends are taking us more towards the expansion model. Mainly, it seems, because there are probably more limited choices in the consolidation area. In the coastal precincts, you either have an apartment option, or you have a single unit house option, maybe a high-rise apartment at Mooloolaba, but you don't have options in between so much. So these lifestyle choices that people are now making, not to have maybe the suburban block, but to have an apartment that's closer, or a townhouse that's closer to attractions like beaches, and not so much there in this emerging community that we're developing. High dependency on a private motor vehicle, 85% of all trips in private motor vehicle. That's perfectly fine for a regional town or city. Rockhampton, 80,000 or so people, magnificent city. Never going to really at that level need a mass transit plan, because you're not going to have the congestion. They have a bus system because some people don't have access to a car, of course, for social justice reasons and so on, but it's not at that level. But as a city grows, it crosses thresholds, and love the cars and all as we do, they start to get in each other's way in the busy precincts. And that's where idea of more sustainable transport, which is particularly the case of public transport. So it's more efficient. Instead of 60 cars, you've got 60 people in a bus or something like that. So you can see there's a lot of difference in space required for that. So when space starts to matter, that's when the car becomes a problem. Problem 3, don't need to say any more. And problem 4, really, that starts to threaten livability and environment, because while you might live, say, in a coastal precinct, if you have a lot of residents coming from suburban precincts to the jobs, to the beaches, to the attractions, shopping centres, cinemas, they're still going to come in, they're going to drive, and they're going to, cause congestion. So, everybody kind of will experience that, not just, people living in different communities. So, and of course, the more that development expands, planned growth areas have been set aside, but as they start to run out of capacity, start to have to encroach into other areas which are set aside as rural land or nature preservation and so on. Not national parks or anything like that, of course, but areas that were previously not seen as urban and were seen more of the rural landscape. So that's kind of the problems that have been identified in this process, the 2 initial stages of the business case that Council's working on, and the potential for a vicious circle to develop. Doesn't matter where you come in there, I suppose, but if you start at the top, accelerating urban expansion, high car dependency, that leads to increasing congestion and erodes livability, and that cycle starts to, I guess, spin. So it takes a downward spiral. The opportunity, though, is for a virtuous circle, which takes it the other way. Lifestyle communities clustered around mass transit, higher use of public and active transport, because don't forget, if you have a more compact community that's clustered around mass transit, things are also closer together, which means active transport is a more viable option for some trips. More people in fewer vehicles. So this is the idea of the mass transit. Make better use of that space in that busy precinct, and maintain and enhance the lifestyle and environmental quality of the region. So that's the 2 choices, to arrest that vicious circle and turn it into a virtuous circle. So in terms of the business case process, Queensland major infrastructure projects go through a formal business case framework called the Building Queensland Business Case Development Framework. It was updated recently in April of this year, and it applies to projects over $100 million in investment. So obviously this project is well into that domain. So if this was being developed by Transport and Main Roads, they would be following the same guidelines, and they would need to work through the process. So we've moved through the strategic assessment. When we did it, it was called a strategic business case. That was last July 2019, reported to Council, made fully public, and had established there's a problem, and here are some ideas to resolve it, and here's how the ideas might work best. The options assessment phase that we're involved in now is about narrowing those options, refining options, and assessing their viability. So, an interim phase, but a phase with significant work. So, if you wanted to talk about the amount of work, 10% in the strategic business case, maybe 20, 30% in the options analysis, and the balance in the detailed business case. So it's a big phase. And in that phase, which will be led by Queensland Government, there would be detailed design of the project, very, very detailed modelling, even simulation modelling on the ground to test traffic performance and so on. There would be, in the case of this project, because it's looking at land use, there'd be consultation on how land use needs to look and so on. And the more detail of everything in that process. And that would lead to the completion of the detailed business case and review, what they call an assurance process, where everybody gets their chop at it, Infrastructure Australia, Building Queensland, a whole range of reviewers, Queensland Treasury, independent panels engaged, they review it, and subject to that, it gets, if it's still viable, it gets listed on the infrastructure pipeline for Queensland and can be considered for funding by the Queensland Government. So it all really happens after the detailed business case. We're in an interim phase. Those are the timelines that we've been working to. We've added the community consultation in recent times, which I'll explain, and that's where we are there in the options analysis. We would then move into the detailed business case phase, which would have more consultation led by the state. I imagine council would participate in that and run the land use planning issues associated with that. Complete the detailed business case post-construction. There would be all that audit process I mentioned. It can sometimes take some years to get approval for funding, of course, depending on what funding is available, what the priorities of government are, and it often comes to the case that all of a sudden there's a push to invest in projects due to the economy or COVID recovery, and they say, where are your shovel-ready projects? So if you're ready, you've got an opportunity to capitalise on that. So Gold Coast Stage 3, which is in procurement now, their light rail system, that was in abeyance for a year or so, and then federal government acted as part of economic recovery, and projects now funded and proceeding through procurement. So you need to get the business case done and get the assurance review done, but it doesn't mean, of course, that you do the project or get the money. That has to be the next phase. It's a bit congested, that slide. And that shows the journey that Council has undertaken as a part of developing the mass transit project and its relationship to other work that Council's done. The 2012 Line in the Sand report, I had the honour of leading that project for Council. And I must admit, when I took the job on, I thought, I wonder how this will go with the community. I wonder if they're interested in this type of initiative, looking at mass transit, given that it was still a relatively small area, in population terms. But there was a task force formed by the council that included business, community. We even had community representatives through an expression of interest process. And it was really encouraging because they showed they knew the issues associated with growth management. And one of them said to me, if you've been here 5 years, you think it might stay the same. But once you've been here a while, you start to realise the quantity of change and the rapid speed of change. And we need to do this sort of long-term planning. So it's very encouraging. The Line in the Sand report did evaluate a whole range of technology options, and it did land on light rail as the best option, with bus rapid also to be further considered. And when we did that report in 2012, all the buses were diesel. Any bus rapid system was going to be diesel, and we're now looking in this process where there are electric buses in widespread use around the world. They're mostly what we call rigids, which are the normal buses you see running around, a 12.5 metre bus, and they have an battery electric power system. They're being developed in Europe, China, a whole range of places, mainly because European cities have actually banned diesels from their city centres or are in the process of banning diesels. So you have to develop electric buses, which is a good driver for technology change. So things are a bit different, say, to bus rapid transit than they were in 2012. But nonetheless, the Line in the Sand did say it appears to have merit, should take it forward. So look, I won't go through all the other documents there so much. The C means that there was community consultation associated with them, and the L means land use was a factor in those considerations. Probably of note, the community, the environment, the integrated transport strategy, which was released in early 2019, that had very significant community consultation and market research. It obviously included the mass transit project, which at that time was called a light rail project, and that's really where we get our head of steam from, is the integrated transport strategy. So implementing that, but it's a feature of a whole range of other strategies that council has adopted. It's also in the regional plan, not so much. It's a mass transit priority corridor, and no technology specified, not light rail, bus rapid, just says there's a corridor here in the regional plan. And it also talks about lifestyle choices in its catchment. So it's in the state statutory regional plan as well. So you can see where we're at that phase, options analysis 2020. That's where we are now. And as I said, the detailed business case would occur later. So in terms of community consultation, initially when we're running this project, preliminary business case, we don't see the state consulting on that stage normally. If they do consult, they'll go out when the detail's there. But this project's a bit different because it does have some land use implications and so on. And I formatted the project really around getting the preliminary business case done, getting it through council and getting it to the state government where there would be a very detailed consultation program. We progressed the strategic business case, that was made public. We progressed the interim findings report last January, that was made public. And we didn't really receive that much feedback on that, so we're proceeding without consultation into the complete this stage and get to where it really matters, I suppose, in terms of decisions, which is the detailed business case. But then started to obviously see issues emerging in the community requesting consultation, pointing to the importance of the project for the region. And we're agile, we can adapt to that. So the council's now resolved, obviously, recently to formally have that consultation program, but I guess we're already planning that as a part of the change of course. It's not really a problem for the project team, and we're looking forward to it. It was more just a different approach that the next phase is where it'll all happen. So we knew that, but you would understand that the community doesn't understand the business case process as well, and they're quite rightly saying we want to see some stuff now. So we've developed this. It's in Appendix A. It's for endorsement today or amendment as council sees fit. Principles. Council has some principles in its own consultation policy on the left, and Building Queensland has some principles in their consultation program. Building Queensland, because many of their projects are things that don't have a high public face, improvements to hospitals and things, I guess, where you're just building a new hospital and so on, there's not always community consultation in the projects. So their framework has to be generic. But they do envisage, where the agency determines consultation is appropriate, that it fits in with that framework. So you can see their principles there, and they're pretty much aligned. It needs to be meaningful. It needs to be obviously earnest. Not much point in consulting if you've already made up your mind, I suppose. Meaningful down the bottom. Commitments. When you consult the community, you're going to talk to them. You're going to say, okay, well, we've taken that on board, we can do this. If that's to be meaningful, it has to be within your power to do that. So when I did this preliminary business case for Gold Coast Stage 3, state subsequently did the detailed business case, and it was determined that council would consult on some elements of the preliminary business case, which they did, really to introduce the project to the community. There weren't that many choices that we had control of, but we did put up a station site options in Burleigh, and we chose, based on community consultation, the site was selected, and the state was involved in developing that. But when they got into the detailed planning, they discovered that they thought they could do it better another way. The bus routing changed. There was reason for them to change the plan, put the station in an entirely different location that we hadn't even consulted on. We'd ruled it out mainly because of the high cost of the site. And the community obviously pointed to well, you've consulted us and you've changed your mind. Now the state ran with that decision, and it all turned out okay. Projects being built or being procured. And the community didn't raise with council, well, why did you consult us if it wasn't going to be your decision? I guess we got off the hook there, but they could have. So just another reason why we were sort of not thinking of so much consultation in the preliminary business case phase was because many of the decisions we aren't going to be in control of when this project is designed and built. 70% of the roads are state-controlled. We don't have any influence over that. Well, we can advocate. We don't control them, so we can't plan. The project itself will be delivered under the Infrastructure Act. For Queensland, it will be delivered by the department. We don't have powers under that act, so we won't be delivering it. So there are a lot of things like geometric design, were there to be property requirements, were there to be changes to car parking, were there to be changes to lanes and roads and things. We wouldn't have control over those. So just for council to consult on that sort of detail would be meaningless because we don't have control of the decision. But we do have control over land use planning and a range of other things, the urban realm and the look and feel of this project as it gets built. Council will be a partner in all that. So there are some things that council can consult on. And of course, the decision to take or not take mass transit technology options through to the detailed business case, we currently have control of that. The state could relitigate it, but they've been on a journey with us, and to be honest, we've probably scoped up the reasonable options in that process. So we can definitely consult and meet those principles, but we just have to be careful that we're not putting things in that we can't control and that will change in the detailed business case when the state redesigns the project. Recommended approach. We don't have a comms consultant. We do have one on board at the moment, but only for this preliminary strategy phase. They've given us some advice on this, obviously, expert advice. But we have to procure, at the scale required of this program, we have to procure through a formal procurement process with different proposals sought and so on. Probably not a public tender at that level, but certainly require a different number of proposals. We have to prepare the collateral. So if it's going to be meaningful, can't really just release the preliminary business case options analysis document into the community and say, there it is, we're going to consult, but it won't be for some months because we're getting the collateral ready. That doesn't seem to be fair to citizens who want to understand the project, just to give them a document of a few hundred pages and say, there's your document. So we're suggesting that it be carried through in the preparation of collateral. Obviously have to procure them, preparation of collateral. We have the summer torpor in Queensland, of course, or Australia, where you don't consult at Christmas time. There's also some planned consultation on corporate documents and things that council is thinking of in November. So seems to a reasonable timeline is to do a proper engagement process, to get 6 good weeks on the ground with the community. It probably can't be done this year, mainly because of where we're at, now and later in the year, I suppose. And there probably isn't any rush on this, to be honest. State know we're doing it, but obviously they understand that, and there hasn't been, to me, an indication that too bad, we'll spend the money somewhere else. I haven't picked that up. So it doesn't seem to be a rush. So the engagement would occur first quarter of next year, after the Christmas holidays are finished, whatever, and engage, review the consultation and report back to council, release the whole lot amend your business case work, obviously, to take the consultation on board. No doubt there'd be a lot of findings in that would influence the detailed business case process as well, because you would get some feeling on the sort of land use change that was going to be supported and so on, and that would inform the detailed business case. So, would it be adding value to the next phase? That's the phase that counts, is to really get this to the state, to get them working on it. It's not going to happen until they do that. So yeah, on that timeline, we report back mid-next year with all the findings, transmitted to the state. State would do their assurance process, Gate 1 assurance. They would hire experts to do a gap analysis to understand what was the difference between our report and what needed to be done in the detailed business case, and they would move forward on that. And it would take probably 18 months to complete the detailed business case. So that's our recommended approach. We did put some scope here, but again, that's suggested scope. Obviously, it's about options. mass transit technology options, and options for urban transformation. Within the mass transit catchment, what are the different formats, the different scales of urban change, the intensity, all those things. It's always been, with this project, a low-key Sunshine Coast vernacular. It's never been, you know, we're going to maximise it and do whatever we can just to make the business case work or something. It's never going to fly, because when the agencies get to review it, they would say, well, this land use you've got, it's not going to happen, is it? You know, it hasn't got the support. So the land use benefits matter for our business case, but we have to have the land use that is going to be capable of being delivered and that achieves the project objectives. So that would certainly be a part of this round of consultation that we're proposing. Can't have the detail because you've got to work this through in stages. And whole conversation's not broadcast, so it's really about, you know, two-way. That's how we adapt in our communities, is understanding pros and cons, having conversations, not just telling people and they say, I do or don't agree with it. I'm also going to comment on the ability of a business case to re-litigate growth management. You know, if we were going to completely change our approach to growth management and adopt a new one, that we can't do that in a business case. We're spending a lot of money on detailed economic analysis and engineering of project options. If that was to be relitigated, I mean, obviously that's up to council, but it would occur, I think, through processes like the new planning scheme, amendment to the planning scheme, and also review of the state's regional plan. So I have to say that while I understand there might be views that the settlement pattern should be different, I can't do that in a business case, really. Oh yeah, and I just got some objectives there. Probably the last one, COVID. By the time, it depends when we do this, of course, but if we're doing it in February, we'll know a bit more about COVID. We know a bit more every week, but sometimes we go backwards. But it'll have to be COVID friendly, and under current parameters you would see a lot of that would be online, and we would need to develop some good online tools. People don't have to sit at a computer and read everything, that we can make it interactive and they can make choices and see implications and that sort of thing. So not sure if we'll be able to put council officers in the field necessarily and, you know, pop up things at that stage, whether that'll be, you know, meet workplace health and safety requirements, but that'll be factored into the planning, and experts will advise us on that. Some expert advice from our current advisors that we engaged just for this phase. Plenty of time, as I mentioned, to plan the activity, get it right. Don't rush it unless you have to, and avoid congestion with council processes. And they're suggesting, as I said earlier, that this is a fairly big program. You need to allow 6 weeks on the ground for people to make their comments and so on. It's not going to be a 2-week process. So we've got some expert advice on that, which does suggest also, as I said earlier, that probably better to release the business case report with the collateral, so people can understand that, and the council can then progress the whole agenda through. Future engagement, as I said, in the detailed business case, and if there were planning scheme changes that are required, you know, to increase the development capability of certain sectors. There's already capacity in the planning scheme in the catchment area for 10,000 additional dwellings. So there's already capacity in there above what's there now. But that's theoretical in some ways, because not all those parcels might be capable of being, you know, redeveloped to the level that the zoning allows. The economics come into play, and the ability to assemble sites and things like that. But there is already capacity in the scheme. So maybe that can be used, or maybe there are some requirements to change the planning scheme as a result of the detailed consultation that's done. And then the planning scheme change itself has statutory requirements for consultation. So anyone who owns a property that could be in the catchment needn't be concerned that the business case is going to somehow get their land zoning changed. That can only change through a town planning process, which has got statutory timelines and has to all be approved by council and by the state. So in terms of progress, we did develop as a part of this a concept master plan for mass transit. There isn't one for the region that's jointly endorsed by State and Council at the moment. State have been working on that, they understand the importance of it, but we're in a different cycle here, so we developed one ourselves to underpin the business case, and we took on board the very excellent work, the integrated transport strategy, which does have a concept master plan in it. We just refined that and tested it a little bit more through our modelling. And the reason we had to do that is because, well, we're going to start mass transit, A, where's it going to go, and B, which stage is the most important stage. You do a stage of mass transit, it costs a lot of money, you want it to work and achieve your objectives. Because if it doesn't work, you won't do another one. So that kind of was the work we did in the strategic business case when it was resolved through that process that a mass transit response is appropriate. The red line is the CAMCOS corridor. It's preserved since the early 2000s by the state, nominally as a heavy regional rail corridor, and they continue to protect that corridor for that purpose. Council, the royal blue line there on the right down the coast, that was then in 2015, the council made a decision to, based on the 2014 consultation, to designate a corridor for the light rail for future planning and feasibility assessment. So that's that royal blue line there going from Kawana to Caloundra. And you can see some high-frequency bus corridors. They're I guess they're a beige colour, maybe a drab olive. And you can see that we've never proposed that one stage of mass transit could deliver on what the region needs for the future. It's got to be master plan. The first stage needs to be work, but it's not going to solve the problem. We need to develop it in stages. And you need to support it with bus upgrades and improve bus services, particularly on the strategic corridors. And the buses need to closely link with the mass transit. And the regional rail, if you like, the red, and the royal blue, the mass transit, need to link together so you can transfer from one to the other. You want people to use mass transit, public transport, make it easy. Don't make it hard. Make it all link up, transfer across the platform, change from one technology to another. That's really important in public transport. When a BCCI was manager, we rolled out the Buzz, which was a high-frequency bus service. We're running our main buses at 15 minutes headways all day up until 11 at night, and the bus operator thought we were going to be idiots, you're going to look stupid. And the thing at the time then was you don't need a timetable, and you just turn up and go, it was cool. And that meant, and people started to do it a lot more, and even busy bus routes got busier. And we all thought, people hate using timetables. But then a few years ago, they developed what they call nudge theory, which just says, if you want people to do something, make it easy. And that's really what underpins public transport planning now. It's just make it easy. TransLink is working on, they have the current Go card, but you have to buy a Go card somewhere. The new smart ticketing, which is being rolled out, just use your credit card or your debit card, whatever. And you can register that with them if you're a concession rider, of which 50% of users of public transport are, because obviously if it doesn't recognise your card, it's just going to charge you the full fare. So just make it easy. Just turn up, get your credit card out, get on the system. No wait, no need to consult a timetable. And in the case of this area, legibility, we know where the system's going to take us. I don't want to look up the transit network plan to see where the 300 or the 600 goes. I want to just know it's a legible service that runs up and down. I know where it goes. Fixed track or guideway and so on. So that's the master plan. And I really need to stress that the business case that we're now working on, the options analysis, focuses on one section of that, but that is not the plan. That's just the first stage. Can't build it all at once. And that means, of course, that the benefits of this first stage are less than if you built the whole system, naturally. Now, the strategic business case identified the priorities range of criteria, transport modelling, so on, and it assessed that yellow area, which is the first stage of Council's designated light rail corridor, should be done first because it linked up your major attractors, your new city centre that Council's investing in, the Maroochydore Centre itself, which is bigger than that, Mooloolaba, the iconic tourist precinct, some opportunities for urban transformation, south of that around the Nicklin Way, that sort of area where the marina is, and then you're going into the hospital and the Batinia Town Centre precinct, which is obviously a very important emerging area. So that sort of ticked all the boxes. It then said priority area 2 is important because it's going to connect up your major growth areas of Aura, Caloundra South, and Beerwah East, which is there's no development at Beerwah East at the moment. It's still being planned, but it will be planned, and there are railway stations planned in both of those communities. So it hooks up that, brings them into the, in this case, the Kawana interchange, and they could transfer to the local mass transit to go to places they needed to go from there. And that's, I don't know if you've been to the Gold Coast recently, but the Helensvale connection to the Gold Coast light rail, get off the regional rail at Helensvale, you have to go upstairs and come down again because of the different heights and things of the technologies, but it's a pretty convenient transfer. The light rail runs at 7.5 minute headways, so you don't have to wait very long for the next one, no matter what time your train gets there. And people catch it out to the coast, and it works. People love it. In the Commonwealth Games, people deliberately did that rather than the kind of special buses they had at Helensvale to take them straight to the venue. They actually wanted to ride on the light rail. And they're now finding that tourists are really using the light rail down there a lot more because they can get from Brisbane to the Gold Coast on the regional rail, transfer, and they can have a swim at Surface Beach or Broad Beach or something like that. So when we used to have backpackers, that was really a big thing that changed. You would then, under the recommendation, do the third area to Caloundra, and the other two, 4 and 5, the royal blue and the, I guess it's drab olive, out to the airport, they kind of follow in sequence as the system gets developed. And all the time, of course, you're improving the bus network to support the mass transit. So what happens under the TransLink integrated ticketing and services framework is that the operators don't own the revenue, they're paid to run. And TransLink owns the revenue and they allocate it into paying the operators to run. And that makes possible integrated fares, because of all the operators had to survive on the fares, they'd all have different fare structures. That's what used to happen pre-2004. So that kind of means that, you do have integrated framework, and because the operators are paid to run, it doesn't matter to the local bus operator if they get deployed off the new mass transit route and asked to run somewhere else to feed it. They don't get the revenue from the 600 service that they run at the moment. It's the busiest service. That already goes to TransLink. So that's what happened with the Gold Coast Light Rail, that TransLink redeployed bus services from the Gold Coast Highway Corridor, which was the busiest service. It was the 700. And the operator was not worse off. The operator got to run buses in other places. So you do get the opportunity in this to improve the bus services as you open the mass transit sections. So the technology options that were carried forward into the options analysis that we've worked on, starting with the no infrastructure solution, because the agencies, Infrastructure Australia, Building Queensland, always want you to look at a no infrastructure solution. If you're going to add 200,000 people in 20 years, you're probably going to have to build some infrastructure. And that's really what the findings showed, that if you just put buses on the road system, it doesn't really change that much. You can improve them, but they're going to be stuck in congestion. And they won't have the pulling power to change people's behaviour. Similar with option 2, that was support them with local bus priority. Neat enough, but didn't really achieve objectives of changing the way people move. Road network upgrades in the Sunshine Coast Urban Corridor, so this is the corridor from Caloundra to Maroochydore, and clearly, while that eased congestion, it just put more cars into the precinct and didn't have any influence on land use. In fact, it would work against land use change because people wouldn't want to live anywhere near the Nicklin Way because it'd be 8 lanes, you know, so it'd be a corridor for traffic. Whereas under, say, the mass transit plan, it's an urban boulevard with the mass transit doing the heavy lifting for people movement from the local area. Quality bus corridor, I'll talk about that. Bus rapid transit and light rail transit. So in terms of options, those are the serious ones that could potentially meet the objective of this project, which is to change behaviour and to support, you know, urban transformation. You can conceive other policy options and things. They were done in the strategic business case, you know, jack up the price of parking, make it ridiculous. Sure, I mean, the price of parking will be determinant as to whether you drive into a centre or not. It's very important, say, in Brisbane, you know, $60, $80 a day. I don't know what the situation is now with COVID, but, you know, it's pretty expensive. And the big centres, people want to use mass transit instead of paying. They can't afford to pay that every day. So it works in Sydney. It does work, you know. It would make people shift. But without something to shift to, if you didn't improve the public transport system, well, what would be the point? And, of course, that would strangle the centres. You know, the centres would... development would go somewhere else outside the centre. So those sort of things were evaluated and didn't work. But happy if people come up with different options that we haven't thought of, more than happy to plug them in and consider them. Because this is about options, and that's what they keep telling me. So I'm okay with that. The quality bus corridor, based on TMR's Coast Connect project they ran about 2010, 2011, they did some consultation on that. They developed designs. They've implemented little bits of it, but you know, it's bus lanes basically, and they didn't have a branded bus on it. They just would run the standard 600 service on it and some other buses on the bus lane. So it was bus lanes and improved bus stops and things like real-time information at the stops, which is tending to be rolled out now at a lot of bus stops anyway, because that technology is getting cheaper. So that was our first option. It's, if you like, the cheapest way to start to change people's behaviours, to put a service that's better than the average route bus. And because it has a bus lane, it does have some protection from congestion. So there'd be a reason potentially to use it because the trip would be quicker than driving. So that's option 4. Standard, well, not standard, to get the capacity every 7.5 minutes headway, you need a slightly bigger bus. So that's the 18-metre articulated bus that you'll see running around in Brisbane. That's what that's modelled on. We just added different livery to it. And that's a Euro 6 diesel, so it's a low-emission diesel, but it's a diesel. That's the technology that we have for buses at the moment. Bus rapid transit, we're starting to get into the higher-end solutions now. And this is about creating a busway, if you like, for the vehicles to use, so they're immune from congestion, except where they have to cross intersections, you know, side intersections. And we can give them signal priority there, if there's not too many of them. So start to need more capacity because the system attracts more people, and the vehicle is a nearly 25-metre long bi-articulated bus, of which there aren't any in Australia at the moment. There are many bi-articulated buses around the world. Most of them are diesel, but the one that is being used is the Brisbane Council's Metro bus, so that's being developed for running on the busways. They've got a big project that they're developing, improving the busway system with this new, and putting this new vehicle onto it. So they've gone through a worldwide process of expression of interest, tender, and they've selected a tender, and the prototype vehicle is now being built in Europe, and they'll get one, they'll test it, and then if that works they'll buy 59 more and they'll run them on the busway. They have the approvals path for safe operation in Australia. They're working that through with the heavy vehicle regulator. It doesn't comply with Australian design rules, it's too big and too wide, but there's an approval path you can follow, and particularly if it's running mostly on Brisbane busways. So things have changed a bit from, say, 2012 with bus rapid transit. So if you look at that cross-section for bus rapid transit, you can see that it looks pretty good. The buses are electric buses, they're fully electric, and in the case of this one, they're going to raise their pantograph as they approach the station. They'll do a flash charge when they're unloading and loading, and then they'll drive off and charge at the end of each run. Then they'll deep charge overnight when the system's shut down. Fair bit of concrete involved to protect the stations there. That's for safety reasons. And the corridor width there's about 11.2 metres for the busway and then up to 16 metres at the stations. This is in a 40-metre road reserve. So it's effectively a little bit more than adding another 2 lanes, of traffic. So yeah, a significant investment, aiming to show very high legibility, stopping things getting in the way, and providing a modern, quiet, clean electric vehicle which will be proven, or not, assuming it will prove itself in Brisbane, before the detailed business case has to be completed. So it seems a fairly good option. Option 6, light rail, that we all generally know, I think. It's electric, fully electric. It has its own, again, guideway, trackway. Doesn't need so much protection because in this case we can have island platforms. The passengers are in the middle, they're protected, if you like, by the 2 light rail tracks from the traffic. And because these vehicles are longer and they can have doors on both sides. So you can have platforms, side platforms or island platforms. So it looks a little bit different. Probably the best product transport and land use planning can offer in terms of, fitting in with urban design. Yeah, you'll still get some issues, particularly if you make a railway vehicle turn tightly, you have to lubricate the tracks and so on. It's a steel wheel and a steel rail. But there's around, I think, 400 of these systems around the world, and they keep expanding them. And when the TMR, they were doing stage 2 of Gold Coast, they needed 4 vehicles, 4 new light rail vehicles. They were sourced from Bombardier and they were being built in Vienna. And the team had to make not 1 but 2 trips to Vienna to convince the manufacturer that these vehicles had to be delivered on time because there was such a backlog in the light rail manufacturers in Europe. That was in 2017. Yeah, so things were pretty busy back then in terms of light rail development around the world, and they still seem to be that busy. So it's a good option. It's the most expensive option in a capital cost. Whole of life operating costs, that could vary. When they do the detailed business case, they might find certain deficiencies, say in the bus operating model, that mean its operating costs are higher and the 2 equalise. That'll be for the detailed business case. This options phase is about balancing options, seeing how they relate to each other, but not in actual final detail. The vehicle that we've adopted has overhead power, similar to the Gold Coast, similar to all the light rail systems in Australia except Newcastle. But new technology is being developed that could prove itself in Australia through Newcastle and through Canberra Stage 2 that has the similar power system to what the buses I explained have. So they have onboard batteries, they flash charge at stations and at the end of the run, and they deep charge overnight. That's how Newcastle works, but it's quite a short line. I think it's only around 4K, something like that. But as we go forward, the Canberra line is longer, and they can't put overhead wires through the parliamentary triangle in Canberra. That's obviously such a heritage precinct, so they're developing for the battery system there. So maybe by the time this project's in procurement, the ability not to have overhead power lines, except at the stations, might be better proven. But we've just gone the safe course and adopted overhead power. In terms of the performance, again, this modelling is only about relativities. There'll be more detailed modelling done for the detailed business case, and they'll optimise some things that we really haven't optimised. one of that things in the model, these models are all validated, they're peer reviewed. The model we've used is owned by Lister Consulting. That's the one that Infrastructure Australia used for their work. And there's a lot of scrutiny of it. One of the things it does do is looks at the ridership on the Sunshine Coast of public transport now and says you're going to have trouble shifting. You know, so it sort of puts penalties in there because not so much Sunshine Coast people are different, but because that you have this sort of low public transport appreciation, so it's harder to shift people in an area like, you know, here or anywhere that's not a big city. So the model picks all that up, and maybe through research, TMR has done some research, significant research for their new model, that might change. So these are conservative results, and they're not necessarily the final results, but they're just the ones that help us appraise the different options. What that shows is that the quality bus corridor, second from the right, doesn't have the pulling power of the BRT and the LRT. And that's probably fairly intuitive because one's a bus lane that can, anything that happens, it's a curbside lane, anything that goes wrong, if a truck breaks down, someone parks illegally, taxis can already use them, limos can use them. You know, so you do have other lawful users and, of course, in some cases, unlawful users in the bus lane. So they're not as good as, in terms of what gets in the way, that the guideway, your busway or your light rail is, because no one really is going to be on there except those vehicles. So that sort of thing reflects in those results. Land use. This has been a feature of the thinking on this project right from 2012, 2011. That's what the census picked up in terms of population and jobs. So this gives you an appreciation of the density and the amount of the intensity, I suppose you would say, of development in the Sunshine Coast, south of the airport, obviously not the entire region. If I flick forward to the trend forecast that we've done for our modelling, without a mass transit investment, it obviously shows more people because you've got to fit 200,000 more people and more jobs. And you can see starts to expand a bit. You've got some growth in the urban corridor. The light rail intervention looks more intense than the trend, obviously. And then the QGSO official forecast, which is the one that counts because that's on the books, that's what the government agencies use for their planning, it's about the same as the light rail forecast. There's also a regional plan forecast which adds more intensity to the coastal precinct because that's the regional plan, the state's regional plan. So there's different forecasts there that are possible to be used. The ones that count in the business case, we're trying to throw forward benefits from a trend to an intervention. So we look at the trend and we look at the intervention. In this case, it's light rail. There's also a bus rapid transit intervention scenario. It's not as influential as light rail. So that's quite close to what QGSO already says. You can pick some changes there, yeah, that's the lie of the land, and much more intensity envisaged in the regional plan. Where that lands us in terms of population, you can see these are for the whole urban corridor. These are not just for the mass transit catchment. So don't, you know, they can't compare with the figures in, say, the interim findings report, which are just for the catchment, because this includes areas of, say, Maroochydore, which aren't in the mass transit catchment. So you can see that the LRT intervention is more people than QGSO and considerably more people than the trend and less people than what Shaping SEQ wants to achieve. So it's sort of sitting there in the middle, somewhere between what QGSO says and what the regional plan kind of wants to achieve. These are the state government's plans, they're not ours. So it shows that there's it's taking us towards what the regional plan's trying to achieve, to invest in light rail. And the BRT is less effective. Now, that's just because we haven't been able to find a BRT scheme that looks like the one we're proposing. So we don't have any evidence of its influence on land use, and business cases are evidence-based. So that needs to be reviewed in the detailed business case, because it looks and feels like a light rail system. So it's quiet, it's electric, no emissions at the source. So it should have similar abilities to attract people to invest and live in its corridor. Just haven't been able to establish that. Job-wise, we actually achieve more than the other two, the state planning agencies have expected. So the light rail investment achieves more jobs in that area. So that's kind of the broad land use approach. And I need to stress that what we're doing in this process is testing to see if investing in mass transit can leverage some benefits in reducing the amount of travel, reducing how far people have to travel, how much energy they consume, how much carbon they emit. All those things are factored into this modelling process. So obviously the shorter the trip, the closer you are to the attractors, the less transport impacts you're likely to cause. Congestion is one where you're putting more people in an area, in a smaller area, so you have to obviously be looking at the ability of the mass transit to carry the load. When Gold Coast Light Rail, the initial planning for that, and the business case, and we actually, if you know Surfers Paradise, it's fairly busy, and there was a 6-lane couplet through Surfers Paradise, so 3 lanes each way, of which 3 southbound lanes went through the middle of Surfers, and tourists were getting run over. The plan was put in the light rail and make it 4 lanes. And there's a lot of activity in Surfers. The alternative was a 6-lane freeway along the seafront. That was what was being promoted at the time. So Copacabana Beach was the model, if you know that. And the light rail came along, the highway was calmed back to 4 lanes, and it worked. Its sky hasn't fallen in because the mass transit takes the workload. And you want people to shift. It's not much point in putting in a mass transit system, costs you a lot of money, and then just in case people don't use it, you build a road beside it. It's might as well just build the road. So because you're trying to get people to change, and you don't get people to change by advertising or anything. You get by providing a better service, and that's what these mass transit systems tend to do. Catchment for stage 1, so we're now focused on stage 1 of mass transit from Maroochydore to the Kawana Hospital. Not the final system, it's just the first stage. And that's the walking catchment, the shaded area. Takes about, from the research, shows that the influence of a mass transit project is about a 10-minute walk. That's when it loses its ability to influence property values, land use change and so on. You can still cycle to it and you can get dropped off at it and all those things. Doesn't mean you can't use it, but most people walk to public transport and walk from it. So it's that sort of catchment that matters. And that's the area that was then studied in the business case and is reflected in the interim findings report. There's no further land use analysis in the current working draft, if you like, of the options analysis then was contained in the interim findings report released in January of this year. We did quite an extensive kind of revelation, if you like, of the thinking and so on that the project was looking at. So those are the numbers in stage 1 catchment. 11,209 in the census dwellings. If we don't intervene, there'll still be some growth. Like I said, there's potential in the catchment. So there'll be 17,000 dwellings in 2041. That's what's been predicted. It's not laid down in law. And the intervention, light rail, because light rail is the most effective that we've tested so far. That's why we're talking light rail, not because it's our preferred option, because that's the most effective for land use change. And you can see that adds, there's 27,011 dwellings total forecast in that catchment, and That's 9575 extra on top of what the trend would deliver. 17436 becomes 27011. That's the business case that we're basing our modelling on. So it's about 135% increase on what was there in 2016. Area of stage 1 catchment, 1248 hectares, give or take a hectare between friends, I guess. And if you put those dwellings in there and just multiply the gross density, it's 22 dwellings per hectare. So that's the gross result on the ground. Now, clearly, there'll be parts that are much higher than that and parts that are much lower than that, and parts that don't have any dwellings because they'll be parks or something like that. So just the gross density. So I just put 22, that's the number. I just put some other things in here about gross densities generally. I'm not really a very good town planner. I've had to rely on town planner's support to do this. So low to medium densities 8 to 30. These are Sunshine Coast examples. Medium 30 to 60 gross density, and your high rise, typically what you might find in Maroochydore or the new city centre, is 60 plus. So the 22, it can fit without properties that are single unit houses that people are happy living in without them being redeveloped. And it can fit by putting in, significant new buildings in the current centres and in the periphery to those centres. I guess areas like cont'd and those areas, in the mass transit catchment. And it can fit with some regeneration along the Nicklin Way, close to stations that has development that's ripe for renewal. If you put a high capacity mass transit system in that people are walking to, the stations will attract people. And if you've got, a big box white goods warehouse there, they're just walking past it because you can't really load a fridge onto a mass transit vehicle. So the land uses don't match. But if it's a big block, the sort of message gets through to the owner, well, I can do something better with this block. It's close to a station. So it's those sort of opportunistic urban transformations that could occur in the catchments. I don't imagine council will be redeveloping any, or the state. I imagine it will be private developers, if it's an economic proposition. So you could do it all in the middle bit, low to medium density, if you wanted, but you don't really have to because you've got your centres that are capable of much higher densities, and you've got some areas that can have your medium densities. And those medium densities provide lifestyle choices for people that maybe they can't afford a single unit block, close to the beach, housing block, but maybe they can afford an apartment or a townhouse. So it gives more choices for people. Trade off living out in Aura or BOR East maybe, something like that in the future, versus living in an apartment closer to the ocean. Now, that's people's choice. What we would say is, well, we're trying to maximise dwelling choices. Not going to legislate to make people live anywhere. Now, the Gold Coast, there are many different facets to the Gold Coast. There are 8-storey high-rise areas. There are low-density areas, some very nice areas out around Highlands Park and things, great ocean views, single-unit housing. What people normally associate with the Gold Coast is the Surfers Paradise, I guess, Broad Beach, Main Beach precinct. And I just put some numbers there. 350 or so dwellings per hectare gross, and if you put them through the corridor, 1248 hectares, you'd end up with 436,000 dwellings. So you could house, a significant number of more people in that catchment, but we don't need to do that. We only have 200,000 extra people in the 2041, and our modelling says that you're not going to get anything like that. You're going to get, this 9575 extra dwellings if you're good enough, and there'll be more of a housing choice mix. So I just thought I'd put that up there for comparison. So the way forward on this project that we're recommending: endorse the framework, prepare the strategy. We'll have to procure somebody, so prepare the strategy, and then help us deliver it. Findings back to council, as I said in that chart, transmit if council endorses the report and the findings, happy with the results of consultation, so on, transmit the report to the state, and then the process kicks on from there. So we're kind of step five. Step 5 is where we go from leading it to becoming a partner, particularly for, say, the land use planning aspects, and in the detailed design phase and the procurement, making sure that you don't get too much focus from, say, the project team. They've got to deliver a project, say it's a busway project, that they take account of the urban realm aspects. So, councils are better at that than state departments normally. So, that would be sort of council's role going forward. Make sure you get a good result on the ground. That's just in the report. There's a typo in the report, by the way. It's meant to be 2023 in the third level down, not 2031. I'll fix that in this slide. Can't fix it in the report, sorry. But yeah, so council receives the options analysis when it's been through consultation, February, March next year. We assess it, bring it back to council mid-year. Council's happy to endorse it. Goes across to the state. Work with state on detailed business case. Very extensive consultation. And then there's an opportunity there for following review of that detailed business case by the various agencies for an investment decision. Could still have the first stage open by 2027 if everything went well. In terms of the community engagement, that's again in the attachment, Appendix A, and that's what the experts have recommended in terms of timelines and so on. Information phase, so reintroduce the project, that can happen, fairly soon, and it can happen in concurrence with, say, other council processes that might occur in terms of the corporate plan, those types of things. So reintroduction. But then meanwhile you're preparing your collateral, you're preparing your proper consultation process. So you hit the ground in February. Engagement, like I said, got to be meaningful, got to be able to sort of show what's proposed and allow people to sort of understand why and suggest changes and so on. So that takes time. The document we have now is a draft. It's very technical. It's not going to allow people to make that sort of suggestion. It'll allow people to see the scope of it, but it's not backed by any consultation collateral. So we understand that, and that's why that timeline's there. Report back to council, as I said, mid-2021, and then you've got the other two processes. The detailed business case, if it's approved by council, goes to the state, they do the consultation. And if the planning scheme is required or is suggested to be amended through that, the consultation program, and then go into a consultation program, a statutory process to change the town plan, if that's required. Mr Mayor, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. You happy to move, Councillor Babrowski? Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Cox, thank you. Would you like to open, Councillor Babrowski?
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. And with your permission, may I address this report from the sitting position?
Of course.
Thank you very much. Councillors, as the holder of the transport portfolio for 8 years, I want to...
Can you just pause for 1 sec?
Sure.
That's not very clear. It's hard. Can you hear down there okay, Winston? Can you hear down there okay? Yeah, no, that's coming through like a bit of an echo on it. So I want to make sure you can hear, but also the folks on live stream can hear as well.
So I'll test that now. Is that better,
no,
councillors?
it's the same.
We've got an echo. Shall I test this now? Is that any better? Do you want me to test the other one?
Turn off that.
So is that any better?
Can you turn off that mic and just use the handheld?
So that's better? That's the best we can do.
Okay, let's go with that.
Firstly, thank you very much, Ken. I think we're incredibly fortunate to have such a dedicated and experienced light rail team. But councillors, as I said, as the holder of the transport portfolio for the last 8 years, I really want to make something very clear. Mass transit is not a secret plan for massive high-rise development. I, like many others, went into politics to protect the Sunshine Coast's character. I owe nothing to developers, and if there was a secret plan to turn us into a Gold Coast, I would fight it with every breath in my body. That is not what mass transit is, and that's not what you've heard in the presentation. I was disappointed I didn't get to speak last week due to my medical episode. In future, I'll try to time those better. I was disappointed because I believed the notice of motion was flawed, biased, and unnecessary considering the meeting today. This meeting was scheduled before Councillor Natoli submitted his motion. He presumably didn't know about it. I therefore think it would have been helpful if in future he discusses his concerns with the portfolio councillor before he submits a motion that is not fully informed. Thankfully, the report today, should it be endorsed, addresses and supersedes most sections of last week's motion as discussed in today's report. But I think what is most important is that we address now the false premise that last week's motion was based on, that Council's advocacy for mass transit is, in Councillor Natoli's words, a hidden agenda to increase development. To explain why that is false, I need to make clear some of the reasons why I think mass transit is so critically important. And councillors, may I signal in advance that I will respectfully request some time extensions. Councillors, everyone knows that we have major transport challenges. Decades of underinvestment by the state and federal governments has led to ever-increasing congestion. Very recently, it's acknowledged the region has made some progress, but without mass transit, it will be quickly worse than where we started. As you've heard, projected population growth on the Sunshine Coast to 2041 set out in the South East Queensland Regional Plan is roughly 200,000, with or without mass transit. We will have to adapt and live with that growth and its impacts. So, the choice we face is whether we plan and implement a mass transit system before and concurrently with the population growth so we can shape the growth intelligently around that system, or whether we wait until the population increases and then, trapped in spiralling congestion, we try to retrofit a mass transit system that wasn't planned for. We are acutely aware that currently only 3% of Sunshine Coast trips are by public transport. The only way that we can get to the 10% target we need to achieve to alleviate congestion is with a mass transit system. As you've heard, only a mass transit system like light rail can provide the smooth and productive ride that helps make public transport a more attractive choice than sitting in your car. Only a mass transit system with dedicated corridors can provide the frequency and consistent journey times that users look for in choosing public transport, and you can't do that with regular buses. But it's important to acknowledge that many of the concerns about mass transit are around development. Councillors, a mass transit system will inevitably lead to new development around the stations. It's just good planning to put residences, shops and services near to public transport. But the mass transit proposal is not designed to increase development on the coast, but rather shape where it goes, to make sure it goes where it creates the opportunities for the jobs, services, and of course, public transport. Without a mass transit system, we still get the growth, but more of it occurs where the developers want it to be, on the coastline, mostly going upwards in height, greenfield sites, and stretching out towards sensitive environmental areas, and eating up what remains of our rural land. Now, I need to point out that some critics, including Councillor Natoli, have been using theoretical maximum capacity numbers instead of actual projections of population. Now, this greatly exaggerates how much mass transit would lead to around the stations. Capacity numbers are technical calculations of how many people could theoretically fit in an area if it was maximally developed with no consideration to real-life constraints. Maximums don't happen. If the Sunshine Coast was developed to the existing capacity without concern for real-life constraints, it would already have roughly double its current population. Numbers like the 80,000 new residents that Councillor Natoli talks about don't represent a real-world increase in population, but rather a theoretical maximum capacity calculation. So in reality, the projection for the area that Councillor Natoli talks about is not the 80,000 new residents, but as you've heard, more like a 20,000 resident increase above what it will be without light rail. Claims like wall-to-wall high-rise are just even more misleading. Our job is to retain the Sunshine Coast character, and the details of any density increases around the stations will be worked out in consultation with the community. Personally, and as you've seen from the density numbers, I don't see why it should include any high-rise at all. At all. But there was certainly never anything in any version of our mass transit proposal that will allow Gold Coast-style high-rise everywhere within the 400 metres of the track, as claimed in the rumours being spread around by the project. It is not, and never will be, our intention of Council to push this project through without consulting the community, nor were we ever hiding the fact that some development around the stations would be logically necessary in conjunction with light rail. If I'd spoken last week, I would have given a lot of examples of specific quotes from the many, many pages describing exactly that in so many of our, and as you saw on the journey slide, 14 public documents over the last 8 years. But for now, I'll just direct you to our 2014 Shaping Our Future report, our 2017 Urban Transformations Directions paper, and our 2019 Integrated Transport Strategy, which included market research, concluding in 2018, not that long ago, showing 77% support for light rail.
Councillor Babarowski, can I just get an extension?
Yes, please.
Someone happy to move? Councillor Suarez, seconded. Councillor Hungerford. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you.
Appreciate it, councillors. Councillors, if you support the officer recommendations in this report, there will be at least a further 3 rounds of community consultation before any changes are made to the planning scheme. First, through the Council's outreach as proposed in this report. Second, through the detailed business case and design of the routes. Third, through any amendment process to the planning scheme. Everyone has their say on the stations and new development around them at least a further 3 times. Councillors, while transport economics and shaping development are all fundamental reasons to support mass transit, equally important are the environmental reasons. The pandemic has crystallised our global interdependence and connectivity, which mirrors the fact that climate change remains one of the biggest challenges we face as a region and as a global community. Transport is Queensland's highest second source of carbon emissions, and cars contribute the vast majority of those emissions. I appreciate it's necessarily a controversial topic, and we haven't yet reached consensus as a council or a community. But I personally believe the science is that we are in a climate emergency. And I know that many critics of this project, including Councillor Natoli, have indicated they agree on that point. If you accept the science, and it's an emergency, shouldn't we act like it? And strongly support a public transport option suitable for the long term with a proven and scalable capacity to reduce our reliance on the ever-increasing volume of private cars. I would ask you to note in its 2017 report from the Australian Climate Council that states, I quote, Expanding access to high-quality public transport is a proven way to reduce car use and its associated emissions, and that rail-based transport, including trains and light rails or trams, has the greatest impact on reducing car dependence, end quote. The Australian Climate Council is the leading non-government body of climate scientists and communicators. And in a subsequent 2018 report, the Climate Council talks about how public transport should shape land use planning in exactly the way Council is proposing. They state, and I quote, when urban development, such as new apartments, shops and offices, is planned around rail stations, then not only do more people have easy access to the train, but they have much less need to travel in general, have shorter distances to travel by car, and easier walking and cycling distance to shops and services. Such integrated developments dramatically improve the value for money for public transport projects, end quote. Councillors, in principle and indeed, that is what we are proposing. The way that mass transit shapes development will also protect our remaining natural land, wildlife and fragile ecological areas. By consolidating development close to existing development, employment and services, it prevents the continual creep of urban sprawl out into our green belts and environmental reserves. I would especially like to draw your attention to Halls Creek, a site near the fragile ecosystem of the Palmerstone Passage, which is proposed as a possible next stage to the Caloundra South development area. The owners of this rural land, Stockland, have been lobbying to open up Halls Creek for development for years. As you heard last week, Councillor Natoli is already indicating a willingness to consider more population in Caloundra South as an alternative to infill around mass transit stations. Protecting the catchment of the Palmerstone Passage and its surrounding community has always been an absolute key priority for me. And if mass transit fails, that will become overwhelmingly difficult. Councillors, the report discusses managing growth and not resisting it. However, I acknowledge many Sunshine Coasters don't want to manage or shape growth. They do want to stop it. I'm sure most of us wish and sympathise with that at some time. But to do that seriously would require us to set a population cap and stop approving new development. That would require a radical change in the state's South East Queensland regional plan. If you were able to get the state government to agree and approve a population cap, we could stop after the areas with existing approvals are developed. Our road network will still get significantly more congested, but perhaps manageable with some upgrades. But let's acknowledge a population cap in the very least would be extremely difficult to achieve given market forces and sector lobby groups, the very high number of Sunshine Coast residents whose livelihoods rely on construction, and the state government's committed growth plans for South East Queensland. But by all means, I want to encourage Sunshine Coasters to fight for what they believe in. If that's to stop growth, go get the commitments from the state candidates running in the election. Maybe you'll succeed and win. But if you don't win, the only acceptable alternative I see is that we get a mass transit system, either light rail or bus rapid transit system, that helps us to manage the new growth and reduce the impact of well over 800,000 more trips per day by 2040. There is, of course, another possibility, where we get the residential growth built into the SEQ regional plan, but we don't get the mass transit system. That's the disaster scenario. 200,000 more people crammed into our already failing road network. That's the future of spiralling congestion, I fear, and is what I believe will occur if mass transit is not successful. Councillors, convincing the state and federal governments not to fund a major infrastructure project in our region will be super easy. Getting the state and federal governments to put a population cap on the Sunshine Coast will be infinitely harder. What I'm asking is that until you win that fight, unless you put a real sustainable cap on our population, don't try to derail the one project that will shape the growth and provide the best pathway to make it manageable and preserve our remarkable region and its lifestyles. Councillor Natoli might think there's yet another possibility. As you've all heard, he has floated proposals that would make the growth projected around his division, cram it into the growth into the hinterland and Caloundra South on top of the growth they're already projected to get. That's not going to work.
Councillor, you need another extension.
One more
Wrap
minute.
it up in one more. Okay, someone move. Councillor Suarez, Councillor O'Prey, second. Those in favour, carry on.
Thank you so much. My division, for example, is already the fastest growing in the region, and its transport network is failing. Killing a mass transit system for the coast and then just pushing all the growth into a few divisions isn't right, reasonable, or realistic. Not to mention that the bulk of employment opportunities and the community services are on the coastal strip. So as you heard, congestion would just get much worse there regardless, as people commute from the hinterland to work and access the services. Councillors, finally imagine our children on the coast in 25 years' time, in 2045. Roads clogged with hundreds of thousands of more cars and without a widely used public transport system. If that happens, won't the next generation of Sunshine Coasters have every right to look back at us and blame us for the pitiful planning that let that happen? I urge you to stay on the right course and support the recommendations of this report today.
Thank you, Councillor Babarowski. Councillor Natoli.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a few questions for you, Ken. I've just heard from Councillor Babarowski about the future population growth over this period to 2041. The figures around just under 20,000 people, is that correct?
Can we perhaps get the handheld mic to Councillor Natoli? And if you can turn off your other mic, thank you, Councillor. Please, Ken.
I don't think... Oh, okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Tully, can you just repeat the question? I lost the track there.
Councillor Babarowski mentioned about the population increase over that period till 2041. Are we talking about 20,000 people instead of the 80,000 people? Is that correct?
Are you referring to the Stage 1 catchment?
Yes.
So the Stage 1 catchment, the ultimate population under the trend, so you've got 11,209 today. Sorry, that's dwellings. Population 30,973. Under the trend, 49,334. Under the LRT scenario, 55,670. So that's it. Sorry, that's jobs. 23,222 in the census. 34,475 under the no intervention, and 55,072. So that's 55,000 people under light rail and 35,000 under no intervention on top of the 23,222 that were there in 2016. So this is within the Stage 1 400 metre catchment.
So what is that an increase of? 20,000, as Councillor Babarowski just said? Is that correct?
19,597.
19.5. So, councillors, I want to take you to page 54 of our report, the financial report, because it doesn't make sense. We talk about 11,209 dwellings currently, and through the intervention process, 2041, that takes the dwellings to 50,761. That's an increase of 39,552 dwellings for a population of 19,000 people. Doesn't make sense to me at all.
Thanks for the question, Councillor. So you're referring to the theoretical capacity, which I think Councillor Babarowski also referred to. So this is used in calculating the actual intervention capacity. So I could refer you to page 53 of the report. Under 3.3.2, it says 9-step assessment, and you'll see that step 7 in the 9 steps is identifying additional capacity unlocked by the project. It's a theoretical capacity. There's then step 8, which is the market-based assessment to forecast a likely take-up. This takes on board market analysis of what would likely be possible based on historical trends, and also assessing the ability to assemble the sort of parcels, because not everybody wants to redevelop and so on in the catchment. And to redevelop, you need to be able to put maybe 2, 3, 4 blocks of land together. So this just reflects experience from the commercial consultants in the ability to, actually assemble parcels for redevelopment. So step 9 is where that actual business case figure comes from, and that's the projected take-up, which is less a figure than the theoretical capacity.
So when we talk about that possibility of actually driving the population to that maximum, we can talk that the population could possibly be 80,000 extra people if we were to reach that maximum. Is that correct?
So it's just a little bit distorted.
The extra dwellings and the extra population that can fit into that stage 1, if we were to reach that maximum, we're talking about that extra nearly 40,000 dwellings, and we're talking about almost 80,000 extra people if we were to reach those maximum thresholds. Is that correct?
I think I understand your question to be the theoretical capacity. If that was reset in planning, could that be achieved? Was that the question? Not under the market-based assessment by 2041. There would obviously be growth beyond 2041, and I suppose that would be a matter for the council of the day to decide, what type of urban settlement they want at that time. So our numbers for the business case relate to 2041, and we're suggesting the light rail could attract that extra 20,000 people to that stage 1 corridor. So that's a significant change in population, but you would hope to achieve that if you're investing in the light rail. So if you think that overall the regional plan is looking to find 87,000 additional dwellings over that 25-year period, of which 62% are said, benchmarked to be consolidation, that's about 50,000, just over 50,000. So of that, we're getting the trend plus the additional growth. So we're getting that we're not getting anywhere near the 53,000. I guess we're getting around 15,000 extra dwellings that have occurred there since 2016, of which only 9,575, and these are projections, obviously, they're not exact calculations, would be attributable to the mass transit. That there's already trend growth there of just over 6,000 or so. So,
Mr. Mayor, if I can continue, then I'm just trying to understand what on page 56, where it talks about urban renewal facilitation toolkit. That's new to me. I've never heard of that before. Can you explain, is that a toolkit to facilitate more development and encourage development, incentives? That's the way I read it. Is that correct?
Look, I think you could, that kit's not been developed, would need to be approved. You could be looking at it, it's saying urban renewal's quite hard because you have many owners in an area. If you compare that to, say, the Aura, where you have one landowner, master plan community, you can negotiate community facilities, all those sorts of things through that one owner. But when you have multiple owners in a corridor, it becomes a lot harder. It becomes harder even for intending developers to assemble parcels, as I said. So the toolkit is really aimed at appreciating what are the things that make development attractive, what are the services that need to be put in alongside that development so it'll be accepted, because you don't want to load a whole range of development into an existing community without improving the services, your schools and community centres, all those sort of things, parks. So the toolkit's really aiming to facilitate that urban renewal process, because our trend is to develop the new communities, and we've been developing new communities in South East Queensland since World War II, and we're pretty good at it. The urban renewal is a little bit harder to achieve, so that's the intention. It's not to maximise development beyond what, say, the town plan says. It's to allow what the town plan envisages to actually happen.
I've got quite a number of different questions, so I'm happy if you, at any point, Mr Mayor, want to take it to another councillor. On page 20...
Can I just see, Councillor Joe, who else would like to speak? Councillor Law, okay. Councillor Cox. Carry on with a couple more and we'll...
Yep.
I'm going to try and organise a break for us at, say, in about 10 minutes, because to try and get the system reset. Yep.
Okay. Mr Mayor, if I can continue, on page 23, it talks about risk. It talks about process risks and project risks. Nowhere did I read about the rejection by the public in terms of the urbanisation strategy. You haven't identified that as a risk. So, to me, it means that it could be business as usual and just keep going ahead, irrespective of what the public thinks about this. And you don't talk about the failure to reduce vehicle usage, because if it doesn't achieve that, then we're back to stage one. And in the Gold Coast, the uptake of public transport there is only 5%, and it's not doing the heavy lifting like you said it's doing. It's still very much reliant on car base. So you haven't identified that as a risk in terms of people moving from cars to public transport.
Well, that would, depending on your project. So if you're saying the project is the mass transit investment, then the risk you just notify would be in the framework that it doesn't work, and that would have to be addressed in the business case, and is obviously addressed in terms of maximising how you get people onto it. That's very much at the forefront. So anything that's associated with the mass transit project is going to be there as a project risk, and that includes things like, your technology doesn't work, the batteries go flat, those types of things. That all has to be factored into the project risk. I would suggest that the urban transformation work, there's obviously a risk that the community doesn't support the proposals and that the council doesn't progress them, and that would change some of the aspects of the business case. But I think the consultation process, both in the preliminary and detailed business cases, would tell us that. Obviously, the risks of delivering the urban transformation agenda carries forward then into council processes, council-led town planning and infrastructure agreements, those types of things. So, Council, there would be a cut-off between where the project risks in this project transfer through to the planning system, but I acknowledge your point that the risk register would have, the fact that the community doesn't support the urban transformation proposals. If the business case is based on those, then yes, of course, that's going to be a risk.
Perhaps one more question, Councillor, and we'll break and see if we can get this sound fixed up.
Hey, there's a couple of things here I didn't quite understand. On page 58, non-capital initiative options. What does that mean? It's almost like there's parts of this report that is foreign language, almost designed not to be able to really understand what you want to do. I don't know why it's not written in plain English, so it's easy for me and the community to be able to understand. And then just one other one, we talk about stations and substations. At no point have you really mentioned what substations are, because I've only ever heard about 16 stations along the 13-kilometre route. But then you talk about all these substations, another, 9 substations, and I don't really understand what the substation's role in the whole process is.
Thank you, Councillor. So the report that's appended as attachment 2 that you're referring to is the PwC interim findings report. So yes, the language sometimes get technical. The non-capital option means that you're not investing in new infrastructure. But I take your point, and that's why we're suggesting that we need to support the release of the technical business case document with the collateral, so we can help people explain in plain English and even help them to understand by conversations what those technical terms mean. Unfortunately, when you have to write a business case, it's written by technicians, and they just think like technicians, and it's hard for them to express it. We can get the business case document professionally edited, but before it's released, but it's still going to be fairly technical, and that's why we think the supporting collateral is important. So it's in plain English and in the terms that a person can understand, and also uses the online tools to help people visualise these results on the ground. So I take your point. We technicians are often guilty of that. In terms of substations, again, PwC report, we're talking actually power substations. So they're not light rail or bus stations. So the light rail or the bus needs power to be taken to it. And I won't labour the explanation too much, other than to say that it's a DC power, 750 volts DC, which doesn't travel very far. AC power travels, that's your big power lines, you can travel hundreds of kilometres. There are a lot of transmission losses in DC, so it's low voltage, so if lines, they don't have high arcing and things, or people are near them, so it's a safety thing. So you have to have the local substations, usually maybe 3 kilometres, something like that apart, maybe a bit less. Otherwise, the tram or the bus is going to run out of power.
Okay, look, perhaps we'll pause there, councillors and Ken, and see if we can get this fixed up in the next 15 minutes. Come back, just say 11:05. We'll resume the meeting. Can I just confirm I've got Councillor Law, Councillor Cox, Councillor O'Prey, Councillor Hungerford who wish to speak, Councillor Johnston, and obviously Councillor Natali. We'll come back to you. Okay, let's break for that time. Thank you. Okay, welcome back everybody. We're going to resume the questions around mass transit, and I'll go back to Councillor Natali for a couple more questions before we move on to some other speakers. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did take an opportunity during the break to talk to Ken about a few other questions, so I'll try and make it brief. I just want to ask the Acting Chief Executive Officer, on page 9 of the report itself, I just want to know about the paragraph before the officer's recommendation, where it says, it is considered that if Council approves the recommendations set out below, the Council's resolution on the 20th of August 2020 will have been fulfilled. So I'm just trying to understand that this doesn't override what we put there. I understand that we talked about releasing the preliminary business case to the community, and that was always going to be the case. The presentation we had on the 13th of July did specify that it was going to come to the August 20 meeting and that it would be released by being placed on the Council's website. So I'm just trying to understand, what does this actually mean if we support today's resolution?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So basically what we have is that this report fulfills a number of the elements of that, and also provides the program for how the preliminary business case will be released over time and gives you a new program in relation to it. So if Council endorses the recommendation today, it actually provides some superseded elements to that previous resolution and enables us to move forward. But the release of the documentation would be as per B, which is in terms of the framework provided in Appendix A.
You happy with that, Councillor? Okay, so, okay, go on to another speaker. I'll go on to Councillor Law for some questions.
Hi, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Ken, for the report. Just a couple of quick questions, if I may. Firstly, you shared with us the pathway size required for the bus being 11.2 metres, and then at a station weight would be 16 metres. You didn't give us the same figures for a light rail in comparison, if you have those available.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. 8 metres for the light rail track corridor and around 13 metres at the station, if that's based on an island platform, which there are no side platforms, you know, along the side platforms are only at the termini. So, you know, like in Maroochy City Centre.
Thank you. And my second question, you've mentioned that a detailed business case must require that it's evidence-based. If it has to be evidence-based, how will we be enabled to actually do something that is pioneering and actually leading the pack in what the future of mass transit might look like? It feels to me that if we are constrained by evidence, then we really may not get the best technology, the best outcome that could actually suit our needs in 2050 and beyond.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Look, the process, Councillor, is very rigorous, and you do need to adopt that evidence, and that's based on previous examples where people have they just love the project and they just try and justify it. So, you know, you've got to get the evidence. But I think, I would say with the BRT option, where I mentioned in my presentation that we haven't been able to find evidence of BRT schemes that were put in to help support urban renewal, whereas light rail schemes often have been, and that's what the research has been based on. But you can design new techniques. So, say, for example, surveys of developers, focus groups, things like that, to understand what they see the bus rapid solution at. That would be evidence. It doesn't have to be built, you know, as observed. You could actually do those sort of stated preference type work to see, well, you know, and the same with people that might buy and use the system, might buy property near it or use it. You can survey the public and get their reaction. And that's actually what the department, TMR, they're building a new model that when it's finished should be superior to the VLC model we're using in respect of the Sunshine Coast, because it's totally focused on the Sunshine Coast. And they've been doing stated preference from thousands of people as to what things they see, what would make them change mode and things like that. So the short answer to your question is, even if you haven't got evidence in the field, a project you can go and visit and interrogate, you can still get some evidence that would be accepted.
Okay, go to Councillor Cox.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And just a couple of questions. Firstly, probably best directed maybe through to Ken. You've told us about your past involvement in delivering sort of major transport projects before, but is it normal for communities to question them and to develop opposition campaigns?
It's transport infrastructure projects are usually fairly hard to progress because of the scale, particularly big ones like this, because of the scale of them. So it is quite usual to get opposition, but the formation of say, action groups is probably, it can happen 50% of the time perhaps, doesn't always happen. Public transport projects are harder because you often get a feeling in the community that they won't use it and they just need some more roads and things like that. When doing a road project, sure, there's some people that might be in the way of the project that don't support it, but pretty much everyone else does. So it's sometimes easier, I guess, unless it's a major freeway going through a suburb or something. So yeah, when we did the Brisbane busways, that was something new, and there was a lot of opposition from even transport people that, you know, this was something new and wouldn't work. And then we obviously had community opposition, and some of that was quite, quite strong. So yeah, Gold Coast had opposition. Most projects you do. The Eleanor Chanel Bridge at University, Queensland, was strongly opposed by the community until they started using it, and so on. So it was, it's fair to say that you'll always get some opposition, and the idea is that you have to be futuristic in your focus, and you have to encourage people to come on that journey with you. That sure, today is today, and the future won't be the same. It's going to change, and to shape that future. And that's often hard because people are so focused on their day-to-day lives. But when you have a conversation, you say, well, think about the future. It won't be the same, so we have to plan. And I think you can get that conversation going with many, many people, and certainly the majority of people in the community understand that.
Thanks, Ken. It's always good to have that sort of context from someone that's gone through this type of situation before. Just another question that I had in relates to an earlier question about the release of the interim sort of findings of the PBC. Would it actually undermine the proper consultation process which Council agreed to undertake last week if we release that sort of ahead of the program?
I think it has that potential, through you, Mr Mayor, it has that potential, Councillor, because it is a technical document. Now, we have been releasing our technical documents up until now. We certainly released the strategic business case, full document, and we published a summary of it. And that made it easier to understand and quicker to read. And the interim findings report, we released that because we just wanted to let people know how we were going with the project. And yes, we did intend to follow a similar process with the options report. But then when it became evident that we needed to undertake some consultation, which we're more than happy to do, it then seems more appropriate to develop the collateral. And in developing that collateral, of course, you might find some influences that you want to improve in the draft report. The experts might say, the consultation experts might say, well, you've missed a point here. People are going to look at that and wonder why it's so. So you need to put some explanation in your draft document. So just to release it and then to come back, say, a couple of months later with your consultation program, citizens who want to understand it will have had to just read the whole document without the program. So that's why the expert advice has been to hold the release and go out with your program. But I've acknowledged, of course, that there's another resolution on the books for that. But yeah, if you wanted my recommendation, I would say better to hold it, develop the material, go out in an organised way. There's no rush on this, really. Let's do it well and do it properly.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks very much for that. I'll just quickly speak to it, Mr Mayor. During your presentation earlier, I thought the slides relating to the gross density examples, that was the first time I'd seen it, but really highlights that there isn't this mass change proposed to the urban corridor in terms of the proposed dwellings and population. So I thought that was really important, and I hope that when we undertake the community consultation process, those sorts of examples will be first and foremost available to the community to see that it's not going to be, the Gold Coast type examples. Because, and once again, I was glad that you actually referenced those in your presentation, because when I had been reading the report just in the last sort of 24 hours, I looked at the stage one length of the track, about the 13.6 kilometres. Obviously, we've heard Councillor Natoli reference the 16 stations or stops. We've also heard about the additional dwellings that could be proposed, the 9,500 extra dwellings there. So when you do, and I'm doing this just to try and illustrate to probably the community, when you divide those number of dwellings over the stops, you get around about under 600. dwellings per stop along there. That's just a rough example, and I know that you've touched on with your slide that there will be probably a little bit more concentrated in other areas and lower density to remain. But when you think about that, just for the people that may be watching this later on, if you're looking at to achieve those additional dwellings as per the interim findings report, and around about that under 600 per station, when you consider something like Q1 on the Gold Coast, it's an apartment building, obviously. It's got 537 just in one building. So that's clearly what we don't want, and that was obviously mentioned in one of your slides there as well. So on the Sunshine Coast, we like to do things a little bit differently and a bit more reflective of our natural environment. So I just wanted to also follow on from that, just in relation to what I picked up as 3.6 in the interim findings report, which relates to the urban transformation that suits the Sunshine Coast lifestyle. So once again, just trying to give that sense to the community that we're not proposing this high density situation as other areas obviously that have been referred to. So I just want to read something out here where it talks about the new consolidated urban development in the Sunshine Coast urban corridor can be designed to achieve a low-key lifestyle that maintains and enhances the Sunshine Coast value, character and identity through a series of urban villages containing a mix of uses which create local community hubs. The second point, providing a range of desirable housing choices suitable for an affordable coastal orientated lifestyle. Third point there, it talks about containing building height and site cover to deliver built form that is consistent with the low-key approach of urbanisation without excessive high-rise development. And the fourth point I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention is that increasing density and development around the stops as a function of the transport system, or transit system, I should say. So hopefully that will resonate with our community that we're certainly not trying to do the wrong thing here. We're trying to protect our Sunshine Coast lifestyle, and that has already been reflected in all of those documents and key strategies for council and the process that you outlined all the way back to 2011, which has had community input. Nowhere in there does it talk about this, high-rise development. So once again, I just wanted to let the community know that that is contained in that report. I also just wanted to say that with undertaking the community engagement, it's going to be challenging for most of the community to comprehend because, as we've already heard, the report's going to be hundreds and hundreds of pages. It's going to have a lot of technical speak in there. We really need to ensure that we delve into that and we put it, as was mentioned earlier, in common language for everyone to understand. I think that is highly critical, and we can't just do that right now. That takes a period of time to work through. So I know that I'm certainly, based on last week's decision, obviously I didn't support it, but the majority of the council did, and I'm fully on board with that. So I'm looking forward to this community consultation. And that's essentially what we're doing here today, is just outlining and endorsing the strategic framework and the community engagement framework. So council's made the decision, we're going to get on with it and go out to the community with all of the documentation so they fully comprehend what this project is about. Because, as we all know, there has been some mistruths being spread out there in the community, so hopefully that will eliminate that. I also just wanted to thank you for the slide that you had up there about the expert advice on the timing of that report out to the community. Because as we all know, the council is certainly aware of it, in November we have got a lot of community consultation with a broad range of other documents, corporate plan, coastal hazard adaptation strategy and likewise. So we need some clear air so we don't confuse this particular item out in the community. So I think to avoid school holidays, to avoid election cycles, I'm certainly on board with what has been proposed. And finally, councillors, I just think that this is a huge and important decision, because whether we like it or not, the Sunshine Coast will experience that future population growth. And, you know, we could potentially bury our heads in the sand and not do anything about it, but I certainly don't want to have that as my legacy. I want to ensure that the Sunshine Coast, the future of the Sunshine Coast, for all of the 500,000 people that will live here in 20 years' time, that we make the right decision and preserves that livability that we're known for and renowned for. So that's why I will certainly be supporting this here today.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. I'm going to go to Councillor Hungerford.
Through you, Mr Mayor. I'll go through a bit of backdrop as to why we're where we are today. Now, it's because of the state-mandated growth targets showing population reaching over 500,000 by 2041 and more than 600,000 by 2050 that we're in this situation. It's not being driven by us, it's being driven by others. And the Shaping South East Queensland statutory document requiring more than 60% of this to be incorporated in current urban developments called urban infill. That's what's creating the pressure here. And we're trying to plan for the future and how this is going to be accommodated. Now, Mr Mayor, there are some who believe cars are evil and people should be forced from using them and made to use public transport by not providing the roads and the parking, so they've got no other choice. To me, that's not realistic. Now, many here that have known me for a while have heard this before. It comes from my experience from holiday in England, and I enjoyed it. Because coming into major towns, and there's more cars there than you've ever seen in your life before, and I was nervous about driving there, but it worked very well. They had multi-storey stations coming into each town and city that showed the number of car parking spaces available. Not only that, the taxis and the buses ran from out the front. And the buses even had the compartments in them to put your suitcases and travel things. So you could get out of your car outside of town, use the public transport, whether it's taxi or bus, to get to your destination and where you were staying. Stay there for a couple of days and then moved on. I thought it was brilliant. I loved it. Now, there's no reason why that couldn't be replicated, or elements of that, in our transport strategy. People will use part of the trip for the car and part on public transport. It also makes your public transport more economic as well. Why we can't do that here, I'm not quite sure. So, in my opinion, giving greater choice, I believe, is the key to success. But that choice must include convenience, affordability, be practical, and give options, not just one thing. One size fits all. Doesn't work in a dynamic society. So it was my pleasure last Thursday to support and in fact second the motion that gave the community greater input into developing this transport strategy. There'll be a wide range of things come there. And I welcome the community's input and the diversity of the input that will come out of that for us to consider in putting this together. So for me to sum it up, giving greater choice to commuters will be the key to this working, having success in it. And I look forward to the input from the community, the further input, professional advice in putting this together, and the final document to take to the state, because it's the state's mandated growth that is creating the pressures for us, and we are trying to deal with it. So it's not council that's creating the problem, but we're trying to come up with solutions to the problems, and it's not easy. And I look forward to that input and the further reports coming to council, and all that being public for public debate. I think that's healthy for the whole process. So I will be supporting this today, and I look forward to what comes out of this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. I've got Councillor Johnston and then Councillor Suarez.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors and James, thank you for your presentation. I found it very interesting, And I'm pleased that we're going down this process where we're clearly stating to the community that we want to hear their points of view before we basically commit ourselves to $7.5 million worth of expenditure to match the state's expenditure on this project. I want everybody to clearly understand I am not anti a mass transit system. What I am saying, and what I've always said, is that we have to take the community on a journey with us. We have to consider their points of view, etc. Look, there's a lot of different aspects of this proposal. There's road congestion. Now, look, if we look at the demographic figures that we've been given in relation to what's going to happen with population growth, etc., along the corridor, the beach corridor, basically. Basically, if you have a look at that, it says if we do nothing as far as mass transit's concerned, and we don't change the zonings, then we're going to finish up with about, what was it, 30... we're going to finish up with a much lesser population than if we put in mass transit, and we change a lot of that corridor from low density to medium density. And I don't think that the community really understands what medium density means. I'm damn sure that a lot of the councillors have got a bit of an idea, but we need to know what heights. We need to know if we go to areas where we put in multiple units and that sort of thing, are we going to stick with what the current town plan says along the lines of providing 0.8 of a vehicle space per accommodation unit? Or are we going to up that? Because that's what we need to do, in my opinion. The idea that we're going to change overnight the behaviour of the community and they're going to go from 2 cars or 3 cars down to 1, it's fanciful. It's a long-term aim and goal. And when that occurs, then we can do something about reducing the car parking in those areas. You know, on the surface, when you read this, if we do nothing, we'll have a certain population. If we put a mass transit corridor in with mass transit, we're going to increase the population to, or the housing to 55,000 instead of 37,000. And why are we doing that? We're doing that so that we can lift the uptake of public transport to 10 or 15%. Now, 10 or 15% of 55,000 people is 6,000 to 7,500 people, the extra that will be using the transport system. But we're going to have a hell of a lot more than that in people. So we're going to have more cars on the road. And it's going to be quite a number of years, probably well beyond the completion of this project, before people's habits change, before the number of vehicles on the road reduces. Because in actual fact, if you take it that only 15 or say 20% of the people use public transport, there's going to be more cars than there is now. But we're reducing the number of lanes. So there's a lot to be thought through and a lot of different ideas that have to be considered. We are not a mature city. We are a developing city and coastal region. We have, one of our major industries is the construction industry, and that is chock-a-block full of young tradespeople, young and middle-aged tradespeople. Now, if you think that they're going to reduce the number of cars in their household from 2 to 1, you're dreaming. You're really dreaming. So what will happen is many of them live in that coastal corridor at present. I know because I know a lot of young people, tradespeople who live in that corridor. We're going to force them out into the outer areas, and when they want to come to work, they bring their utes to the coast. We have to cope with the amount of traffic that is going to be generated. And as I said, I believe it's essential that we do something about a transport system, but we need to examine various aspects of it. And if we think that the success
Can I get you an extension, councillor?
Thank you.
Someone move, please. Councillor Hungerford, second to Councillor Law. Those in favour? That's carried. Please carry on.
Thank you, councillors. If we think that we're going to change the behaviour patterns, etc., and that these people who've bought and built homes in the coastal strip, they're going to be happy about us pushing them out into Aura and Harmony and all those other areas on the periphery, well, that's a consideration that we have to look at. But also, so far I have not seen how we're going to bring people from those areas into the stations to use the multi-transit corridor. And that's going to be the success of the whole thing, because the success of it can't just be predicated on the fact that people who live along the 13 or the 23 kilometre stretch are going to be the people that use it. We have to encourage our population from outside that corridor, that basically 800 metre strip, 400 metres on each side of the corridor. We have to encourage the people who live outside that to, as Councillor Ted says, maybe we need to put in stations where they can park their cars and park and ride. And I'm a great believer in park and ride because I've seen it work so well in various countries, not only the UK, but Europe and in America as well. And we have to have a proper integrated transport system. It's not just about something for along the coastal corridor. I'm also not entirely convinced that we should be going just with light rail. One of the major problems with light rail is that it's very heavy in infrastructure with electricity and rail. The next problems that flow from that is that you lose the flexibility of moving the transport corridor into other areas. You're basically stuck with it. Once you put it in, you want to be damn sure it's right. So if you use buses and you have to, for varying reasons, shift the corridor or move the corridor slightly or something or other, it's not as big a cost and it's not as big an interruption. I encourage councillors to adopt the resolution. I think it's going a long way towards everybody understanding, everywhere in the community having a better understanding of what's being proposed. We need to have a situation where the transport system isn't driving the town plan. The town plan needs to drive the need for a transport system. And that's one of the concerns that I had. But thanks very much for listening to me, everybody. And if I'm wrong, I'd like it to be explained to me where I am wrong. And as you know, Mr Mayor, I'm quite amenable to saying, well, I accept the fact that I got it wrong. But please, if I can get an explanation as to why I am wrong, that'd be great.
Thank you, Councillor Johnston. We'll go to Councillor Suarez.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, I'd just like to bring it back to what we're actually debating today, the resolution today, which is to endorse the community engagement framework contained in Appendix A. Obviously, we've still got a lot of questions as councillors, and the community have a lot of questions as well. And this resolution is going to provide that outlet for the community to become informed. We've just been told that we've got time to do that in next year, which gives councillors time to get some more information from council staff on this proposal as well. The framework for the community consultation talks about informing the community, engaging the community, and then providing a report to the community. I think having that three-phased approach is a really good one, and being able to inform the community prior to any community engagement gives them time to understand this complex information. So while we don't have the details of the actual community engagement plan, that's part of the process as was outlined before, I think it would be really good for councillors to understand what that engagement framework, the details of that will be as we go forward, just to make sure that we're comfortable that our community will be given the adequate information. So in the information stage, what documentation they will be provided and how, and then in the engagement, what methods depending on our environmental situation, and what inputs, as was mentioned earlier, what inputs they can have on decisions that we as council will be able to make in our final reports, and also to identify to the community what changes perhaps the state government may make when they go through to that final report. This is a long-term project, as has been mentioned as well. The other thing that I think would be important to include in the community consultation would be how that would roll out over the long term. I mean, we're talking about some scary figures in terms of population growth, dwellings, number of dwellings, and that's not going to happen overnight. That's going to happen over a long term. And I think having that, that pictograph of what medium density may look like along these corridors was really helpful, but also how that might be staged out over the long term to achieve that final outcome would be really helpful as well. And then just with their input, how that input is going to be presented in the final report and how that's going to help us make our decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Suarez. Any further speakers? Councillor Law, I'm going to come back to you, Councillor Jay. Councillor Law.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. The early development of the region that became the Sunshine Coast on the 1st of August 1967 was all along the transport corridor between Beerburrum and Landsborough. And the CBD at that time was arguably Nambour. But since then, most people who've come to live here have chosen the coastal strip. And today, 80% of the people who live on the Sunshine Coast live on the coastal strip. And during that time, the services that make up the modern region that we call the Sunshine Coast are all on the coastal strip. The new Sunshine Coast Hospital, the new CBD that is coming, a centre, a multi-use event centre, aspirational goals. But the centre and of the Sunshine Coast is the coastal strip. And as we go through this process and other processes that will come at us, we must bear in mind where people choose to live. No one made them live there, that was their choice. And I don't see anything to suggest that people are going to start making different choices other than to keep living and choosing to live when they can, when their income or whatever it is allows them to live there. That will be their first choice. We know that we've got growth of 2.6% annually. That might increase. If we look into 2060, 2070, that population growth may be far greater than what it is at the moment. So in the years that led to the growth of most people living on the coast and all of the services being built there, and also our new services being built there, meaningful, effective mass public transport was overlooked. Now we've got an opportunity today to make sure that we put an effective, environmentally sensible public transport system that can move people around, get them from where they live to where they need to be each day as quickly and as easily as possible. And we need to take the opportunity to do that as soon as possible, because if we come and try and do this in 20 years' time, it will be far harder than it is today. So we need to talk to the people who live here at the moment, but we must make sure that we're looking, when we make these decisions, into the future and not at what it looks like today or what it looked like last year or what it looked like in 2000. But we need to make effective decisions now that prepare us for 2041 and then give us a really sound foundation for what might happen in the 50 years beyond that. And it's occurred to me today that when we're looking at other planning applications and things that want to be developed on the coast, we'll often put over that 100-year flooding map. And yet we're arguing about mass transit with population growth only for the next 20 years. So perhaps we need to get a little bit more effective and make sure that we're planning for a future that is way beyond what we might ever see, but that the future generations will have to live and experience. So in the 60s and 70s, when the coast, there wasn't much there, we need to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes and forget to put in essential infrastructure that means we can have a lifestyle and a way of living that is very good and protects our environment, so that the future is a very vibrant, strong and good one for the next generations. That's what we need to be considering, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity from this resolution, which I will be supporting, that we discuss these things with our community and make sure that we can bring them on the journey that gives us a very successful and wonderful future for us all and for the people who are yet here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Law. I think we're back to you, Councillor Natali, for any further questions or wrap up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's really interesting that since we had the presentation on the 13th of July, that the language has started to change, and you know, everything's sort of starting to downplay the significance of this. But the numbers don't lie. We need to meet our obligations, if we've been told, in terms of the infill targets, 62% versus the greenfield. And 20,000 people just won't cut it. Just won't cut it, councillors. You know, we're talking about a significant number of people that make up the future 200,000 people. 62% of that doesn't equal 20,000 people. Now, when I read this document, I'm trying to understand, what is the driver? Is it public transport, or is it really about urbanisation? And to me, when we go out to the community and talk to them, I don't want to sugarcoat or downplay what could actually happen, because there are a number of triggers here that can take us right to that maximum number. Let's not kid ourselves and not play this down. It's significant, and the community needs to know this and needs to understand this. Like when you read some of these documents, on page 62 of 93, the last paragraph, it says, options assessment process concluded that only the light rail transit option and potentially the BRT option are considered to have significant benefits in achieving the important land use criterion. Quality bus corridor options is based on bus lanes, and although it performs well in terms of transport and costs, cannot achieve the full range of urban renewal benefits sought by the SCMT, Sunshine Coast Mass Transit project in the Sunshine Coast urban area, corridor, sorry. And then when you look at the options assessment, the weighting for land use was 30% and the transport outcomes was 45%. But they are connected, because if you don't have the light rail, that is the conduit for the greatest amount of re-urbanisation, it doesn't work. And so the land use says how the option impacts on the land use outcomes in the corridor and enables urban renewal and promotes infill development. This criterion considered the amount of development around the mode and its ability to satisfy the infill criteria of council. We're not talking about transport, we're talking about urbanisation. It's a completely different thing. And then we go to page 84, we talk about land value uplift, raising land to its highest and best use and increasing its development intensity to match the capacity unlocked by the reference projects. It is likely to be the most significant urban regeneration impact attributed to the project options. And then on page 85, It says, if the mass transit investment was based on light rail transport or technology with similar influences on the land development take-up, there would be significant additional dwellings in almost all station catchments. And I'll come back to that. Goes on to say that the fixed track mass transit such as light rail would provide certainty for residents, retail, commercial property investment. This is one vital factor leading to a considerable intensification of property development around fixed track mass transit investment in stage 1, and could potentially unlock greater dwellings, population and employment growth through additional market intervention. The analysis has taken a conservative view to reflect historical residential and commercial market demands along the corridor. The results could be higher than expected with the right approach to urban transformation. And we talked before about the toolkit. Is that one of the significant things that council is going to do? Is provide the incentives so that the urban renewal process will possibly meet its maximum target, rather than the 20,000 of infill of what we need to probably look at 120,000. So where does the other 100,000 infill go if it doesn't go in this one corridor? How do we deal with that? And then we're allowing Aura, Palmview and BWR East to keep developing low density, car-based development, and we don't have a solution for that in this process. Councillor Hungerford, I can tell you the solution is not the mass transit light rail corridor. It's the Camcos corridor. It offers every opportunity for us to have a spine that connects to Brisbane, the main heavy gauge rail, coming all the way into Maroochydore via Kawana.
Councillor, can I organise you an extension? Someone move. Councillor Winston, second. Councillor Suarez. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Carry on.
So it takes us through the Kawana Business Centre, the hospital, and through BWR East and Aura. Now, it's going to be significant growth out there. And what we should be doing is saying, maybe we need to rethink, should it not be high-density, transit-orientated communities that are built out there? Is that part of our urbanisation strategy? Is that a smarter way to go? Build the transport options for these people that are going to be living there that are car-based. The report talks about it, but ignores the fact that all of these people need to get onto the coast if they're going to go to the employment centres of the hospital and the future town centre. But it could do that if it had the heavy rail. The corridor is already there, but there's no commitment to build it because it doesn't deal with the bringing the development onto the coast and significant development. Now, we've heard previously, and I don't know why now we talk about medium density, because there's always been high density talked about around the stations. And as far as I'm concerned, the council map on its website, which was released in 2017, says high density enterprise corridor, not medium density, high density. And you have a look at Talinga Street down at Bedina, 7 stories. It's in a high density zone, not a medium density. So, you know, like the impacts of these decisions that we make are significant. And the reason I've raised this, Councillor, is that when we go to the community, we're not going to downplay this. We need to be honest with them. We need to find 120,000 infill, and where are they going to live? Because you're telling me now it's only 20,000, Councillor Barbaroski. But where's the other 100,000 are going to go? But the light rail gives it the corridor and capacity to put another 80,000 plus. It has that capacity to even go beyond the 80,000. And that will be beyond 2041. So the significance in terms of the changes, 16 stations, 13 kilometres, 400-metre radius of high density, it will be wall-to-wall high density because you divide, if you had the stations evenly spread out, that if you look at it 16 times 800 metres equals 4.8 kilometres, and probably the difference is the route that goes over the Mooloolah River and Perera Canal. That's the potential, that you have wall-to-wall high density. I've never said high-rise, I said high density. And 7 stories high density at Talinga Street, incredibly bulky building. And when you look at that type of potential in the corridor, if you're going to fit 80,000 more people there, that means virtually, and 50,000 dwellings, it's almost like another 4 of everything that is already established in that area. It talks about livability. There's no livability for those people. The way that we manage our growth in the future has only ever had one option, and that's the option to look at the light rail option down this stage 1. Never looked at about the rest of the coast. It doesn't solve the problem for the rest of the coast. 8% of the population live in that area now, and you've got 92% of the other population that have impacts of transport come out of Nambour Connection Road, Caloundra Road. All of those won't be able to benefit in terms of the light rail. But if you have a CANCOS heavy rail connection, you can build those parks and rides all along that spine and give those options to those people to be able to use that and connect it. That is, to me, the smartest option, and should have been the only option that we looked at. And then later on, the light rail could be a possibility. So the reason we go into public consultation is because the community did not know about this urbanisation strategy. We are not to downplay it. And I believe that part of the community consultation process requires that, and I hope Mr. Acting CEO, that we take this on board, that we have a community reference group that actually works with the consultation process, and that community reference group is able to ensure that we have the ability to be able to consult with the community 2 ways. Conversation happening with the community and the community coming back and feeding that into us. And then through that process, if there are people out there that do have the technical nous and understand documents of technical nature, that they be given the opportunity to actually have a look at the full report rather than the report that's going to be changed. I would hope that we just are prepared to allow that to happen, to be open and transparent and have everything out so the community knows that what's in that document and able to feed that information back to us.
Councillor Tully, can I get you another extension, or are you ready to wrap up?
I'm ready to wrap up.
Okay, all right.
So I support this resolution going out to the public, but as I mentioned, Mr. Mayor, I want to make sure that we are fair income with the community, we are upfront, and not to try and downplay the potential and what the impacts will be on our community.
Thank you, Councillor Tully. Councillor Cox, you've asked a question. Good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just a question through to Councillor Natoli based on his speaking to the motion just now. Councillor Natoli, are you okay with the fact that the South East Regional Plan, talking about its infill targets of 62%, therefore all of the urbanised areas, not just stage 1 of this proposed light rail, mass transit, I should say. It just sounds like you're confusing the fact, and I think this just, once again, misleads the community as to the population densities.
I think I'm misleading anyone. The question is...
Just put your microphone, it's on, sorry.
It's on. The question is that we need, if we're going to meet those targets, there's a certain number of people that are going to form the infill amount. Where are we going to put them? That's all I'm saying. If we're not going to put them in this corridor, then where are they going to go? And how are we going to deal with transport options for them? If it's only going to be 1/6 of that infill target going to go into this corridor, then what the hell are we doing? Spending billions of dollars building for such a small amount of uptake doesn't make sense to me. I really want to understand what the potential of this is and the impact on our land in terms of the way it is at the moment, and I want to understand how that relates if we do reach the maximum. If we do push 80,000 of the 120,000 people into this corridor, I want to know what that feels and looks like, and I want to make sure that our community knows that. And if our community is not happy with that, we need to listen to them. Because if they don't support that, then where does that leave us? Do we just railroad it through and ignore the community? Or do we go back to the drawing board and start to look at proper urbanisation strategies?
Thank you. Councillor Suarez.
Just to further on that point, if I could ask a question to Mr James Rupre on where we would be having that infill across the Sunshine Coast outside of the urban mass transit area over the next 20 years.
Thank you, Mr Rupre.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. Councillor, the South East Queensland Regional Plan and the Sunshine Coast Planning Scheme 2014 both contain very definite urban footprints and urban growth boundaries. Consolidated development within that those defined boundaries will contribute towards the consolidation targets effectively. So to the point being made around consolidation being met outside of the proposed mass transit corridor, that is actually correct. Anything that occurs within the boundary of the urban footprint has the ability in some way to contribute towards the consolidation targets.
Councillors, I'd just like to ask a question first and then speak to the motion. And my question is to the officers. Have we ever had a request from the member for Kawana for a thorough briefing on the mass transit work that's been done?
Thank you for the question, Mr Mayor. My understanding is we have given a briefing to the member for Kawana, but quite a long time ago. We have not had a question about that, certainly in my time in council, which dates back to early last year.
Okay, thank you for that. Look, I had a engagement with the media yesterday, and they asked me some questions about mass transit and where we were going, and I was trying to help them understand. And it was interesting that I referred to, as I have done here before, the Bob Abbott Council 2008 to 2012 and the interest in mass transit, light rail specifically, that was dealt with at that time. And Bob must have seen that on the television last night, and he sent me a note to say that, and I was seeking to sheet home the responsibility around public transport to where it belongs, and that is with the state government, and indeed with our state members. And in particular, the state members in those key seats of Caloundra, Kawana and Maroochydore, which effectively cover the length of the proposed mass transit system. And Bob made the point that in reference to the state members, most of them were there when I was mayor, so we're going back best part of a decade. I'll make slight adjustment to the wording, but have done diddly squat since then. And indeed demonstrate that they can't even work out between themselves the importance of a network of connectivity through their divisions, because some favour fast rail, and I'm talking about fast rail along the Cam-Cost corridor that Councillor Natoli referred to, that will probably only stop in 4 places. Biwa, Ura, Kawana, Maroochydore. Now, I'm not sure that would be considered a terribly acceptable form of public transport. It may be if you're commuting between Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast, but that's not our goal. We want to actually have a self-contained economy here. And really, the people who would be using fast rail coming to the Sunshine Coast would be people who perhaps want to come here as tourists. The integration of light rail with that fast rail is vital. A, to get people between Sunshine Coast and Brisbane, but more importantly, how do we cater for public transport into the future? How do we move increased numbers of people around the coastal corridor effectively. And that's what our council is seeking to get to the bottom of and demonstrate and work with our community to identify what ultimately is the best solution and then how we go about doing that. Now, God forbid, and I heard Ken mention, we could have our first leg in 2027. It's putting a fair bit of pressure on. We're 7 years away. Bob Abbott was in council talking about this 10 years ago. All right? And there's a lot of work being done in that time, but we're a long way from getting people to start thinking about a modal shift. And I take Councillor Johnston's comments on face value, but we're not seeking to convert that coastal strip overnight either. I mean, this is a plan for the future. And I made the remark here a couple of weeks ago, we have a big responsibility to our community to make sure what is delivered now, or what is planned for now, delivers on the outcomes that they need in the future. The member for Kawana has been very critical of council's work in this area, and I think that's regrettable. He's in an area that contains important community assets like the stadium, and he obviously recognises that's important because he convinced his party to put up the $20 million we requested for the development of the stadium. Now, what does that stadium look like in 8, 6, 10 years' time when it's catering for 24,000 people and we have the same transportation model that we've got today? I couldn't imagine it'd be very effective. But add to that the growth of the hospital, the town centre, the completion of Batinia Island, the industrial estate transitioning to new urban uses, which I'm sure will be due by that time, access to beaches and various schools and what have you as that develops. I mean, we can't survive with what's already planned in an area like Kawana unless we take some bold steps into the future. I also note the member from Maroochydore on the news last night rebutting what I'd had to say, that the solution will all be in the Malula River interchange, of which she's undertaking to deliver in the first 100 days should they be elected into Parliament. Well, I can tell you, councillors, that as a result of the work I did with Minister Bailey and his department, we have a commitment to a detailed business case. And irrespective of who's elected into the government, that business case will be ready 100 days into the next Parliament. But individual elements like the Malula River interchange aren't going to solve our much broader public transport problem. So I'm more than happy for us to be doing consultation, but I don't want to see us lose ground. If there's a council sitting here in 10 years' time who still haven't delivered the public transport solution, God forbid. So I'm certainly fully supportive of what's being proposed here today, and I can only see good coming from a transport mode that enables us to disperse activity right along that coastal corridor. It'll be 23 kilometres by the time it's left Caloundra and arrived at Maroochydore. 23 kilometres that will allow people who come to the Sunshine Coast, maybe for events, maybe for conferences, maybe for a whole lot of reasons, they'll be able to stay, participate, attend anywhere along that corridor will be made easy. We won't be trying to force people in particular areas to have their accommodation adjacent to where their conference might be. They can make various choices of where they want to stay based on their budget and other items, which will add economic activity right along that corridor. So, as I said, I'll certainly be supporting this motion today, but I'd ask each of you, particularly those divisional candidates, divisional councillors who are in overlay the state government electorates, to really put pressure on those state government members to give us an answer. What is their plan? Not just criticise what everyone else is doing, but what is their plan? Ultimately, it is the state government's responsibility. So I'd like to know what Stuart Coward, Jared Blay and Fiona Simpson are going to do for public transport on the Sunshine Coast. Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Babarowski to close.
May I remain seated?
Yes, please.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Councillors, just a very quick question, if I may, to Ken. Sorry, Mr. Deutsche. Too familiar. Who determines what defines density per hectare, and does the development sector accept those definitions of what the densities are? So for in your slide, for example, you had very low was under 8 dwellings per hectare. Medium to low to medium was, I think, 8 to 30 dwellings per hectare. Who sets those categories, and are they accepted as an industry standard?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I might defer to Mr Rupre or Mr Cootes to talk about that.
I thought you were all knowing, Ken.
Thank you, Mr Cootes.
Through you, Mr Mayor, Ken is all-knowing on transport matters. I'm probably a little bit more, I wouldn't say all-knowing on planning, but probably a bit closer to that. So when you ask that question, are they industry standards? There is no such thing as an industry standard around those numbers. What you typically find is that planning schemes will use dwellings per hectare as one measure, not all the time, but one measure. But the numbers that you're talking about are largely recognised as representing low density, below that 8, and then some form of low to medium density in the 8 to 30, and then upwards of that, in that spectrum. So they would be fairly widely accepted numbers for characterising those forms of development.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Look, Ken, I wondered whether I could just ask whether it's reasonable when you put up a slide earlier on about the walk-up catchment area for the Sunshine Coast Enterprise Corridor was 22 dwellings per hectare on average. You mentioned that it would be higher and lower in certain places, but on average, 22 dwellings per hectare. You also then had a follow-up slide, which I just wanted to see if it's a reasonable comparison to make, with the Gold Coast being 350 dwellings per hectare. Am I drawing a long bow there, or is that a reasonable comparison between the difference, 22 hectares per dwelling Sunshine Coast walk-up area versus the Gold Coast 350 dwellings per hectare? Have I misunderstood that?
So the 22 dwellings per hectare was the gross density if we put the 27,000, I believe the figure is, dwellings in that catchment.
Yep.
It was 1248. So that's a resultant gross density. What we did with the 350 per hectare, the gross density was for Surfers Paradise and Main Beach. There are many, many parts of the Gold Coast that are much less dense than that. Overall, it's a higher population in 2/3 of Sunshine Coast area. It's double the population effectively. So its density across the whole region is higher, but those very high densities from, I guess, Main Beach through to Broad Beach are the ones that we were talking about in that slide.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. And councillors, I just wanted to emphasise that to help people really understand any comparisons that are made between the Sunshine Coast, even with the mass transit system in place, and a Gold Coast. To me, it's not a reasonable comparison. It's really designed just to be emotive and scary. Having said that, councillors, I really have been very grateful for all of the questions and debate today. I thank you. I think it started to reveal how complex and really important this project is. And councillors, mass transit from the beginning has been motivated by a passion to protect the Sunshine Coast character and our way of life. Look, I understand some are sceptical. In fact, I really encourage scepticism, really healthy. But what I don't see as useful is a determined, deep cynicism that somehow we're in a conspiracy to urbanise the Sunshine Coast beyond the character that we all know is what people move here for. Look, over the past few years, we have been intensely focused on securing commitment of the state government and ultimately the funding, because as the Mayor has constantly pointed out, we are in this gig because essentially if we're not in it, it's going to happen to us, and we're not going to be influential on the design and the plan and the timing. It has become clear that Council obviously needs to resell the big story, the big picture, and that's what today's report is about. We will take the community on the journey with us. I want to finish by reiterating that all the projections for our region expect the population of a growth of around 200,000 plus over the next 2 decades. Now, and putting aside the detail, which we know is to be examined in the detailed business case, the simple question to me is this: do you think the coast will be able to cope with that growth better with a mass transit system or without one? In which scenario do you think we have a better chance of retaining our character and achieving our aspiration, which I really sincerely hope to be real, to be Australia's most sustainable region? Councillors, I urge you to vote for the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Babrowski. Councillors, that brings us to the resolution. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We'll close the meeting on that point. Can I just, before I do close, remind you that Sunday the 30th of August, this coming Sunday, starts Legacy Week. Legacy Week is a very important week for fundraising for Legacy, and you'll be aware that Legacy is a group that's been around for almost 100 years and made a commitment to look after the, initially I guess, the wives and families, but increasingly anybody involved in the forces, in the services, to ensure that their families were well catered for. There's 950 people on the Sunshine Coast who rely on Legacy. The legatees are a very small number, and they are, I don't think that might be saying, getting older and older each year. In fact, one of their members, Alan Quartermain, is 97, and he's still helping with Legacy. So he sets a marvellous example, but they, like others, have obviously been impacted by COVID-19. Their ability to raise funds has been impacted, and I just want to remind you and all those on the live stream that Legacy Week is a very important week, and if you can do anything to help them, like make a donation, buy a badge, please do. Thank you, and we'll close on that note.